Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Maitland City Council meeting of November 14th, 2022. If you would please silence your phones, and we'll start off the meeting, if you would, with a moment of silence, please. Rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Presentation and a proclamation. Gloria Capozzi from New Hope for Kids. Is Gloria here this evening? All right. Well, I guess Gloria couldn't make it, but I will go ahead and read the proclamation. Because New Hope is such an integral part of our community. Whereas New Hope for Kids Center for Grieving Children, a nonprofit organization, is located in the city of Maitland, Florida. And whereas New Hope for Kids is unique in that it brings two children's programs to our community. The Wishes for Kids program, which grants wishes to Central Florida children between the ages of 3 and 18 who have a life-threatening illness. And the Center for Grieving Children, which provides support in a warm and friendly environment for children and families who are grieving the loss of a loved one. And whereas New Hope for Kids will be sponsoring Children's Grief Awareness Day in Maitland, Florida on Thursday, November 17, 2022. Whereas on November 17, 2022, citizens and communities throughout Central Florida are encouraged to wear blue in an effort to raise awareness and show their support for grieving children and New Hope for Kids. Now therefore, I, John P. Lowndes, by virtue of the authority vested in me as mayor of the city of Maitland. Oh, please come up, sir. You're just in time.
I couldn't get out of your street lights.
Legendary Maitland traffic. You got me. I'm still in the whereas. All right. I've read most of it, but I'll go ahead and reread the last one. Whereas on November 17, 2022, citizens and communities throughout Central Florida are encouraged to wear blue in an effort to raise awareness and show their support for grieving children and New Hope for Kids that seek to serve our young people impacted by the reality of death. Now therefore, I, John P. Lowndes, by virtue of the authority vested in me as mayor of Maitland, Florida, do hereby proclaim Thursday, November 17th, as Children's Grief Awareness Day in the city of Maitland, Florida, and urge all our citizens to join me in observance of this day. So, do you have a few words for us? Would you like to share with us?
Well, this is Grief Awareness Month nationwide. And we're part of the National Alliance of Children's Grief that has organizations like New Hope for Kids down the street all across the country. And we try to create awareness this month because of the deleterious effects that death can have on young people that you can't see, and they show up 20, 30 years later down the road with emotional and psychological situations. So anyone is invited to our walk tomorrow night. It's in Altamont Springs. We walk around the lake area there, and we have a ceremony to recognize death in our families. So you're all welcome, and thank you for your attention. John, thank you so much for our report. Oh, yeah. That's right. Get it all in? Thank you.
Yes, that's what they came for you.
Great words.
Okay. Let's see. Do we have any old business? Mark, is there any old business to report?
No, sir.
Okay, no old business, let's go on to the consent agenda. Would anybody from council wish to remove any items from the consent agenda? Don't see anybody who would like to remove any. Is there any public comments on consent agenda items 3 through 14? Seeing none, let's close the public hearing on that. And bring it back up to council. The motion would be in order.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
And second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Lauren, please call the roll.
Councilmember Guthrie.
Aye.
Councilmember Hall Harrison.
Aye.
Councilmember Wurzel.
Aye.
Mayor Lowndes.
Aye. Okay, it's the public period where any member of the public can come up to the podium and address the public and address the council on any item that's not on the agenda tonight. And so I think, yes, a lot of you are here for items that are on the agenda. This is the non-agenda item.
Hello, I'm Stacy Larson. I'm the director of the Maitland Public Library. And it feels very early to be thinking about the holidays, but I don't see you all again until any of our events have happened. So I just would like to take this time to invite you to some of our holiday-ish themed events. On Sunday, December 4th, will be our annual Holiday Tea. This is an event intended for adults and families. It's just a tea. Come and sit down together with your neighbors, talk about everything that's going on. It's cozy, it's lovely. It's actually my very favorite event that we do all year. We do some amazing events, but the holiday tea for me is my favorite because people who might not otherwise have anything at all in common sit down together at a table, eat delicious things that I and my staff have baked, and drink a cup of tea. So it's a great time. It's at 2 o'clock on Sunday, December 4th. And for the younger people in your life, on Saturday, December 10th, also at 2 o'clock, we will be having a Polar Express pajama party. So wear your PJs to the library, come watch the Polar Express, eat cookies, drink cocoa. We will have crafts and activities throughout the afternoon. So Sunday, December 2nd, holiday tea. Saturday, December 10th, Polar Express PJ party. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Stacy. Is there anybody else in the public? Please come up and give us your name and your address. And how about it?
I have some things to pass out.
Okay, you hand it to the clerk and she can tell us about it.
Thank you. Hi, this is Liz Klon. I live at 940 McGregor Way. I'm here today to discuss the sewage backflow flood damage done to 3 homes on McGregor Way in relation to the wastewater division bypass pump. My husband, 4 kiddos, a French bulldog, and I live in 940 McGregor since we purchased it in June of 2018. Ever since then, we've had issues with backflow. Each situation typically would resolve itself within a few hours. In May of 2021, we had an emergency plumber come out to investigate. They could not determine the issue. In September of 2021, we had backflow in our showers, master bath, floor beneath the toilet, and had another emergency plumber come out. They ran a cam down the pipe to investigate, and oddly enough, it showed no blockage from our house to the sewer line. We had them run a high power flush out of precaution. On September 29th this year, Hurricane Ian caused the backflow issue to turn into a massive flooding. It came up over the tubs, showers, toilets, and floors, seeping through our master wall and flooding our step-down living room entirely. I spent 12 hours cleaning it out with generators and shop vacs and kind neighbors. On September 30th, city workers working on the pump station forced more sewage water up through the toilets, floors, showers, and bath. When we identified this, I ran down to the station and I pleaded with the city workers to stop. They told me to take it up with the city when it reopened the following Monday. I then called the city and they sent out 2 police officers to talk to those city workers, but the problem persisted. I took to Facebook and posted on the official City of Maitland page and various community boards trying to reach the mayor or board members hoping that they could help stop the workers from flooding our homes again. I did not receive an official response in Facebook Messenger until the next day. Since Ian, it has come to my attention that this is a pre-existing issue of which concerns and complaints have been lodged with the city spanning across the last 10 years, yet nothing has been done until now. Why? Looking at the price of each pump on the agenda tonight, they cost but a fraction of the damages done to our homes. Right now, our household, my household, total financial impact is roughly $100,000. I would like to seek restitution and repayment to the damages suffered by our 3 households, and I would like a plan put into place to ensure this never happens again. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Klein.
My name is Elizabeth Young, and I live at 2501 Macbeth Avenue. I am right up the street. I am on the corner of McGregor and Macbeth. And there is one house between Liz's and mine, the Hall-Liches. They were not able to be here tonight because Ms. Hall-Lich had a pacemaker installed today, but I have pictures and notes from them as well. I also suffered the same thing that Liz happened, sewage backflow in all of our bathrooms. And if I could approach the.
Sure.
We had this happen 2 different times before. One, this is for my house, and this is for the house next door. The next door neighbors had sewage throughout their entire house. They were not able to, they didn't wake up to it like I did. I woke up at 4 a.m. when it started backing up and was able to do some mitigation. My damages were not nearly as extensive as theirs, but I had the same issue. I had sewage in all of my bathrooms, ruined part of my bathroom, my master bedroom floors. It happened on Thursday. It receded on Friday. The same thing happened after we'd spent hours cleaning up our houses. It backed up again long after the storm was gone. It appeared to recede once pressure was relieved under manhole covers, but once that happened, then sewage was running into the streets of Maitland and into the sewer, basically, same thing. This happened to me once in approximately 2020. We had to call out an emergency plumber. By the time the plumber got there, it was in the evening. It had receded, but the plumber, like with Liz's house, said that there was nothing they could see that it was in the house, that it could be from the city's sewer. And my damages were insignificant compared to theirs. The Hall-Liches, theirs is looking at $100,000 as well. Mine was like $3,000, and I have recovered it, but I mean, I've fixed the problem, but what I want also is assurances that this isn't gonna happen again. And if need be, that the city puts in back valves, sewer back valves or backflow preventers, whatever they're called, to prevent this from ever happening, because it's now happened to 3 of us on different occasions and in times when there wasn't a massive storm. I know Ian was a huge storm, but this has been a continual problem that has existed for years, and it needs to be rectified. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Young. Does anybody else like to address the council in public period? Seeing none, let's close the public period. I'd like to say I'm very sorry about that, Ms. Klein and Ms. Young, and we were aware of that as it was happening during Ian. Of course, everybody was experiencing flooding, and it was obviously an issue that was, the city was out there, the city folks were out there, so it was a problem that we knew was happening. I'm sorry you were the ones who have to really kind of bear the brunt of that, and that's, so just can't imagine that situation in my house, I'm very sorry about that. And we take it very seriously. As I was, I think we all were, all the council members were in touch with the city manager and city staff during that storm, trying to figure out what was going on and how we best serve folks who are, during these backups, because we were, it was torrential flooding and backing up the sewer systems. It was a rough couple of days. So, but again, I'm sorry that happened to you, and we will look into it, and we've been looking into it, and hopefully we'll be able to resolve it to everybody's satisfaction. I don't know that you'll ever be satisfied, but it would be. But I'm very sorry about that. We'll certainly look into it. We'll take it very seriously. Okay, let's.
I want to ask a question. Is to Ms. Young's point, is there anything she brought up a backflow valve. Is there anything we can do to heighten where that pump is so, it's a little higher out, or put some kind of valve? Is there any way to structure that a little?
I can't speak to I'm not familiar with the technical aspects of what's going on with the sewer system there. I do know on the macro level, we are decommissioning that station and opening new lift station 1 after the first of the year, so that's going to be located a half-mile away down the hill. So that lift station will be gone after the first of the year.
So that'll pretty much, hopefully,
We'll find out.
Sure they're fine.
But we'll certainly look into it.
Yeah, this, as probably everybody knows, lift station 1 is really the kind of the choke point going out of the city, collecting a lot of the sewage, everything from this side of 1792 goes that way through Castle area. Lift station 1 handles that whole load, and we're decommissioning that, and we've been paying and building a new pump station, like I said, half-mile away. But that station takes a lot of pressure because it is kind of the last pipe through the city before it's on its way out to Iron Bridge. Okay. So we do have a decision to make tonight regarding the appointment for Planning and Zoning Commission. Lori, would you please introduce the appointment?
The term of Kathleen McIver expires in November of 2022. Ms. McIver is interested in continuing to serve and desires to be considered for reappointment. Along with Ms. McIver, and there are 5 other residents: Jody Berry, Greg Hardwick, Kayla Keelan, Alan DePonte, and Nathan Stemper, who all submitted volunteer to serve, and they're included in the packet.
Okay. And so Ms. McIver wishes to continue. She's served a term. She has another term to serve. And we have 5 other residents, which is nice to see that everybody's interested in serving on our city boards. Are there any, let's go ahead and take nominees for this seat on the Planning and Zoning Commission. Does anybody have a nomination?
McIver.
All right. Nomination for Kathleen McIver. Any other nominations? Okay. According to our rules, what we need is, let's close the nominations. What we need is a vote on this. We need a first, second, and third.
That'll be my first.
And that's, we'll call that your first. Yes, we have first. Do we have a second for Ms. McIver?
I'll second.
Okay. And do we have a third for Ms. McIver? All right, I'm going to, let's see, who is Andrew or Gallo? For a second, by rules, I didn't want to gavel in my hand while I do this. I'll third Ms. McIver.
It was a fun game of tennis.
Yes. Okay, thank you, Kathleen, and also thank you to everybody who put their name in the hat for that. And please, we have more openings coming up for P&Z in the future and our other citizen volunteer boards, so please stay interested.
I just wanted to ask, the agenda typically shows with, it's like the application has changed, the form's different, and then it doesn't show preferences for their indications on when they want it to be considered, which normally it is on the form, so I was just, yes. Is it in a different place? The form looked different to me, like the printouts changed or something. Oh, okay, it's not up.
Oh, yeah, that's online.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Okay, we have a discussion item tonight regarding Duke Energy's proposal to harden and underground our electrical system, their electrical system. And Mr. Regentine, would you like to introduce the item?
Absolutely. Mark Regentine, Interim City Manager. Just to start off with, as we discussed at our December 10th City Council meeting, Staff has been engaging with Duke Energy in conversations regarding potential undergrounding projects on the electrical system in different areas of the city since 2017, 2018. Starting in July, we met with Duke, with the city, and they informed us at that meeting that they were moving forward with reliability projects throughout the city, including the Dimerick area. All those projects are scheduled for 2023. The projects consist of hardening some portions of their system and undergrounding other portions of their system. The hardening consists of replacing the smaller poles with slightly larger poles, and lines are hung vertically versus horizontally so they don't catch debris as it would fall during storm events. I included a lot of information in my staff report, so I don't want to go over that in any great detail. I'll, of course, answer any questions you might have after I go over this overview. So we'll just move forward. So instead, I'd like to give sort of a quick overview of where we came, what we talked about last meeting, and where we're moving forward tonight. These are the Duke Energy projects for undergrounding in 2023. They include Dimerick Estates, and these are the lines south of Thunderbird and west of Seneca Mojave line on the east side of the neighborhood. This does not include Dimerick Drive, Arapahoe Trail, or Seneca Mojave, where there's some transmission lines in the rear lots, and it also does not include Wigwam Place. Our last meeting, we were discussing Wigwam Place as a separate project. Since that last meeting and our meetings with the representatives from Duke Energy, we discovered that Wigwam Place was tied into the Dimerick system, so that will add that little cul-de-sac to that project, to that Dimerick Estates project. We also have Maitland Isle that's going to be undergrounded. This is Mariner Way, Shell Point East and West, just south of Horatio. Hope Terrace, which is a small little street just west of Maitland Avenue and south of Sandspur Road. Lake Sibilia Shores, Pride and Woolsey are also included as you move further down the Sandspur Road, as well as Maitland Woods and Lake Colony Estates as you move even further down Sandspur Road. Those are all projects that are going to be undergrounded in 2023. Since our last meeting, we also learned that the Druid area was a project slated to be undergrounded in 2023, and that includes Southview Road. These are all neighborhoods that are north of Maitland Boulevard and west of Maitland Avenue. So that's Southview Road, Druid Isle Road, Lake Cherry Road, and Lake Hope Drive. As far as the hardening projects go for 2023, there are several hardening projects that are shown on this map and included in this list. Those include Dimerick Estates, where they're going to be undergrounding the distribution lines, which I described, but there are also some feeder lines in there that are supposed to be hardened. That's along Dimerick Drive, Arapahoe Trail, Seneca and Mojave, like I mentioned, and then a east-west line between Chippewa and Mohawk. Also scheduled for hardening are Minnehaha Shores, which is Minnehaha Circle and Kyle Drive, Hillman Avenue, which is a little bit further to the west right here, Delroy Park, which is here, which not many people know that is Delroy Park. That's the Trotters area, east, west, south Trotters with Pace and Adios Avenue. We have an area just west of Maitland Avenue that includes West George Avenue, West Sibilia Avenue, and Hillcrest Avenue that are also slated to be hardened. And not shown on this map, again, that we learned after our last meeting and our subsequent meetings with Duke, there are 3 other projects, Gem Lake Drive, Grove Street, and Grove Court. Gem Lake Drive is a north-south road that you access off of Monroe at the very south city limits of the city. Grove Street and Grove Court are in Park Lake condos that are accessed off Lake Avenue, so those are south of Lake Avenue. So those are the hardening projects that are scheduled in sort of a neighborhood fashion. There are also some projects, in addition to those more neighborhood-related hardenings, that Duke's doing some more what I would call corridor hardening. These include Horatio Avenue from our eastern city limit all the way to Maitland Avenue, Maitland Avenue from Horatio to Maitland Boulevard, and Sandsboro Road from Maitland Avenue to Wymore Road. We discussed these briefly at the last meeting in terms of what they meant to the system. We did not get any project costs for hardening those or for undergrounding those. Discussion we had at the last council meeting was those are very expensive lines to harden, and there didn't seem to be a lot of interest from the city council in going underground with those lines, although I just wanted to bring them up because there are residences that are located on Horatio and Sandsboro, whereas Maitland Avenue is primarily a commercial core. Sort of the big hole in the discussion at the last meeting was the cost of these projects. So I included on this slide the cost that we know and some estimates that our friends at Duke have given us. The top two costs, obviously we know that Dimerick Estates, that we discussed at the last meeting, is $900,000. And that is for the city's portion of Dimerick Estate. When I say the city's portion, that would be the portion that would be the hardened lines that would go to underground. Minnehaha Shores is $200,000. That is also that difference between hardening and undergrounding. And if just for a second, I'd like to sort of refer back to one of the discussions we had at the last meeting, and that is that when you're talking about the lines that are currently slated to be underground by Duke, the way those projects work is Duke will come in, underground those lines, bury those lines, give you a new feeder to your meter base, and convert your meter base at no cost to you. So there's no cost on those areas that are slated to be underground to Duke, to those Duke customers, those city residents that are in those areas. Continuing, the Delroy Park area, which is the Trotters area, is estimated about $315, and you go down the line, the next, there's a couple less expensive ones because they're shorter runs. Hillcrest Avenue is a little more expensive at $65,000, and then of course Hillman, which is more of a feeder line, is estimated at about $220,000. So the total cost of if the city were to embark on a undergrounding project for everything, estimated at $1.76 million.
Mark, can I ask a question?
Certainly.
I don't want to cover your questions as you go forward, but that $900,000, just take example for Domrick, and that's the construction that the city would have to pay to underground their system.
Yes.
Does that include meter conversion? Because we'd have to pay for that.
No, that does not include meter conversions, and that doesn't include any relocation of co-locators. As we talked about last meeting, it's not just Duke that's hanging on their poles. You would have noticed on the first slide I showed, the power lines are the highest lines on the poles. The lines that are lower than those are communications lines, typically telephone and cable. The cost for relocating those also has to be taken into consideration, and so it does not include the meter conversion. It doesn't include working with the co-locators to co-locate those. We did have to reach out to both Spectrum and CenturyLink to talk to them about whether they would be willing to go underground. We got a response from Spectrum. They said that they would likely follow Duke if they went underground. They would not tell us whether there would be a charge to the city for that. So that's still a question that's out there, whether there would be a cost to the city to pay for that undergrounding. And we have not heard back from CenturyLink at this point in time.
So the Delrick is $900,000 plus how much in meter conversion? Do you have it? Is it like $150,000, $200,000, something like that?
It's approximately $1,500 to $1,800 per home is what we use when we see these costs before.
Okay.
Mark, can I just ask? So a lot of people in here weren't at the last meeting, so maybe give them what hardening means when we're talking about hardening the lines.
Yeah. You can see the existing poles out there right now, which are, as far as the exact specs on it, when you harden the line, you put a fatter pole in. It's more resilient to wind, and a taller pole. So it's about 5 feet taller, and I believe when we talked about it last meeting, it's about 18 inches in diameter versus a 12-inch in diameter pole. So just slightly larger, but more wind resistant. and then the lines are hung vertically versus horizontally, like I said earlier. These costs do not include Gem Lake Drive or Grove Street or Grove Court. Again, we just didn't have time to put those costs together between the meetings, so there are some, depending on decisions that are made, there could be some additional costs. There would be some additional costs that would be associated with this. As we discussed at the last meeting, we have not budgeted any funding for undergrounding projects. We just finished our budget process. We're in the first month and a half of the budget. So anything that we would expend above what's budgeted would have to come from the city reserve funds. We also looked at funding options through special assessment and Duke's tariff rules, which are included in the staff report. If there's any questions on that, Cliff and I will be able to answer those. I don't want to get that in detail unless there's some interest in that. We did not have time to run the numbers on the individual areas as far as if there were an assessment, what that assessment would be. We've been sort of tied up with time constraints in terms of managing other projects that have been going on. There have been a storm or two that rolled through the area that have distracted us a little bit from our normal duties, so we didn't have time to put those together yet. So that's kind of where we are on the cost side of it. Tonight, what we're looking at is to get some direction from City Council on where we're going to go with the undergrounding and how we should proceed as staff. So to sort of facilitate this, I've included 3 options that we can undertake. First, of course, is to just allow Duke to proceed with the identified projects per the design that they finalize and move forward that way. The second would be to address each project on a street by street or neighborhood by neighborhood basis individually, then determine how that funding would work individually. We haven't put a plan together for this. We were looking forward to the discussion tonight, but typically that would be to notify each person about what those costs would be, what the project is, provide some information to those affected property owners on time frames and construction, and then conduct some variety of public meetings to take input. The next option would be to establish, just to say we're going to underground everything and figure out a funding source for everything that's on their list. It'd be certainly envisioned that those last 2 options would have an impact on reserves or potential impacts on future use of general fund capital money and how that capital money is allocated in the future. One thing that has come up in our discussions with Duke is if the City Council would like to underground these projects in the future, Duke and the city could agree to this to stretch these out and underground them in the future. However, if a future City Council would decide not to fund a project, so say a Minnehaha Shores was set out in a 2025 budget and we have an agreement with Duke that we would pay for that undergrounding at that time, and the future City Council would not have the funds to do that, then that neighborhood would not get the undergrounding and not be hardened. They would just be bypassed and they would keep their existing system. So there is some risk to that, and not knowing how funding is going to be allocated in the future or what those funding sources would be, there, like I said, there would be some risk to that. Another consideration is that we're only talking about 2023 projects on this list. We know that Duke has plans in 2024 and over the next few years. They have not developed those yet, but we do know there are plans out there based on our discussions. So we would be just making these decisions for this year, but if a policy is set, that might carry on to the future years, and we can't guess to what those projects would be or what that level of funding would be. So, like I said tonight, I'd like to sort of have a discussion on where we'd like to go with this, what City Council's feelings are, and what direction we can provide staff as we move forward.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Does anybody have any questions for Lauren?
I'll have some for
We do have our Duke representatives here tonight. We have the same crew that was here on October 10th. So if you have any questions directly for Duke, they are here to answer any questions.
I have a question, I think, for Mark at this point. And part of it is context, I think, for everybody here, because I've talked, as I'm sure everybody has, to some residents in between the 2 meetings and before. And realize that as I catch up and learn everything before and after, that as long as I'm satisfied, I understand, but not everybody else knows all the things I've learned. That Domrick, there were some questions last meeting as to why Domrick specifically was brought up on the agenda as opposed to the other neighborhoods. I think I even asked that question because there were other neighborhoods implicated. And my understanding at this point, and I know Mark will correct me if I'm misstating, is that because Domrick, as it was brought up in the last meeting, as part of one of the quality neighborhood programs, what I understand to be almost 2 decades ago, there has been a priority of undergrounding in Domrick, and that in 2018, as it says on our agenda report, the city paid some amount of money to Duke, which was passed by that council at that point, to give an official quote for undergrounding Domrick. That quote never came, that there were updates from Sharon and then Mark in terms of requests of where's our quote, and that never came until late July of this year, which is when it came, along with all of this and these timelines and deadlines that would not have ever been anticipated, that this is the way that would work. And so this is our quote. And it came in a package that sounds like it was rather unanticipated.
Yes.
So all of that being said as background, what I heard you saying at the end there was that we could say, let's put Domrick, because of some of the things that are in our agenda report, but that I don't think you said out loud, that were from our city attorney about the procedures for ad valorem assessments and special assessments. It really wouldn't be practically possible, is what I read. I don't know if everybody else would agree, by December 31st to do that legitimately.
Yeah.
And so because of that, if we wanted to say, hey, let's just put a hold on that, see if we can do it, not by December 31st, but see how we can get that done and put Domrick on this, for example, Domrick, on this other list so that we can get this loop system and all of that on a different timeline, that what I heard you saying is that then there would be no guarantee when that would ever get done, and that we would also be potentially taking all of Domrick that's already on a list for Duke to underground or be hardened and improved in some manner off that list. So we could potentially be harming everybody without any guarantee. Am I correctly
It would
summarized?
certainly be delayed. If it was delayed till next budget year, then the city council sitting then through the budget process would make decisions on the general fund funding or the use of our reserve funds to fund any projects, yes.
In any of the circumstances, and maybe this is a Duke question, I'm not sure, but in any of these circumstances, whether we were to somehow magically agree by December 31st on paying for anything, or if we were to sideline something for later discussions for a budgeting year where we can budget for it, are there any, do those kind of agreements or what have you with Duke, do they include timelines where we say we'll pay for it as long as it's done by, or begun by?
we will have to defer to Duke on that, but in our discussion since the last meeting, we did talk about that as deferring those projects and entering into an agreement to fund those in the future. Then they would defer those projects and we would sign an agreement to fund, and that's where it came out. If we funded them, then they would move forward with the conversion to undergrounding. If we didn't fund, they would just pass those projects by and move on down the line.
Thank you.
So, Mark, so everybody knows, Duke came to us a couple months ago and they said, hey, here's a project we're going to do, and these are going to be undergrounded, these are going to be hardened. And so the discussion tonight is, do we just go with that plan that they do, or do we look at the homes that just got hardened that are probably in the same area, and then what we can do to get those undergrounded? So that's part of this discussion. With that being said, Mark, 2 things. One, if you have a slide of the areas, that would be cool to put up. And could you talk about where that funding would come to do these projects?
If we're going to fund them all, right, like I said, I can pull up the map in a second to show you the different areas. If we're going to fund them all, then like I said, we have not budgeted any funding in this year's budget, so that would have to come out of reserves. So we have reserve funds for, we typically hold for emergency situations. We also have the ARPA funding that we've talked about several times, that we're going to have the intent was to have a workshop on how to allocate the American Rescue Plan funding that came from the federal government. So we have that money sitting there, so we would have to pull any funds that currently aren't budgeted out of those reserves to fund any future capital projects.
Thank you.
And Mark, could you just remind me, because we did have the briefing this morning and talked about this, could you just remind me, what was the surplus balance that we had for the beginning of this year, just in perspective versus how much this would actually cost us if we were to do it all in 1 year?
Could you repeat that question? I'm sorry.
So when we talked about it this morning, you told me about the number that we have for our fund reserve,
Yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And that total amount was like 2.2 million, right?
We have in unencumbered fund balance, we have $5 million.
Okay. And what we had left over in income this year was?
Pull up the agenda report.
Was like 2 point something, right?
Yeah, but that was then reallocated back.
Right.
Yes.
So if we were to take care of this project at 1.4, 1.7, and that's before we've taken into account the additional costs for the individual houses to be actually connected with the meters and everything like that, what you're basically saying is we would have zero funds left over in an example budget, if it was to carry forward this year's budget to next year's budget, to basically do anything else.
Yeah, that money would have to be reallocated to the project, where you did earlier today, allocate those projects to the streets, sidewalks, boardwalks. That would have to be reallocated to a project like this. Then we have to figure out how to fund those
So we have no money left
projects.
over to do anything else because it would all go to this one project.
Yeah, that money we'd have to find more money to do those projects.
Okay. Thanks. I just want to make sure I was clear on that.
Or defer those projects. That'd be another option.
And Mark, could you go back to the slide that shows the red lines and blue lines in Delmark Estates?
Robert, can you give me a hand here? Full page. Stretches a little bit, but would you like to go over this real quickly?
Yeah, I just wanted to use that as a prop, just to kind of set the terms of the discussion here as I understand it.
Okay.
Okay, so Delmark has been kind of like at the front of this because of the QNP, and it's just the history of going to Duke's predecessor, which was Progress Energy, and asking for undergrounding because the service had become so unbearable that they just, back in the 1990s and early 2000s, it was just, it was difficult. And so the residents of this area, and full disclosure, I'm a resident of that area and have been for 20 years. The push was to get underground because reliability was just abysmal. And I'm not beating up Duke here because this was your predecessor 7 years ago. Duke's fine. It was Progress Energy we were beating up at the time. And so that was the reason that we started off on this undergrounding tour. So Delmark Estates was making a lot of noise about it because it was a service problem, and got the attention of the city and developed the QNP, which never actually got funded. It was kind of an idea that just never got funded because of the recession and because of a lot of reasons. But that was how this all started. Now fast forward to 2022, and we have a proposal from Progress's successor, Duke, to say, here, we come with your undergrounding plan. At long last, we're here. Here comes the cavalry. We're going to underground Domrick Estates. And if you look at that map, all the east-west lines, you know, the Comanche and Apache and Choctaw, and all those east-west lines are blue. They have blue lines down them. And then the three north-south lines are red, which is Domrick Drive and Arapahoe, and then Mojave and Seneca there. And they're red because, as I understand it, and perhaps Duke, we have Duke representatives here, and I hope they'll get up and enlighten us in a little bit, but my understanding is those are red lines because they're feeder lines, and the distribution lines are the east-west blue lines that come off there. So all the blue lines for all the homes that are there, if your home is on a blue line there, you're on a distribution line that's set by Duke to go underground. If you're on a red line, what Duke proposes is instead to remove that pole and replace it with a taller pole with no cross T's on it, so it won't catch the debris that it used to catch. And it'd be hard. That's what hardened means. Okay? So that's what Duke proposes to do. In this scenario, and this is where I think the terms of debate are. In this scenario, Duke will pay to underground all the homes on the blue lines at Duke's cost. Duke will pay, and correct me if I'm wrong when you get up, but Duke will pay to underground every home on the blue line there, which full disclosure includes my home. Duke will also pay for the underground conversion to your home, which is the service line that goes from, currently it goes from a pole to your house, the little weather hood you have up there, that's the service line, or the meter conversion they call it. So Duke will pay for every undergrounding of all those homes and the meter conversion. That's no cost to the city, no cost to the residents. Duke will harden those red lines, those red feeder lines, at no cost to the city, no cost to the residents. So that's Duke's plan right now. So Duke has come to the city of Maitland and said, here's our plan. We're going to harden the red lines. We're going to underground the blue lines. No cost to the city, no cost to the residents. How do you like that? And so we can take that plan and say thank you, Duke, and Duke will execute that plan at no cost to anybody in the room. Or we can say, well, what we like is actually to underground the red lines as well, or some portion of it. We like to thank you for blue lines, but we like the red lines too. That's where the cost comes in. That's what we're talking about. That's when Mark's slide got up there with $900,000. That's where we start paying. Duke will do it on their dime, as you see on that diagram. If we want to put the red lines underground, it's going to cost us over $1 million just for those three streets. Those three streets will cost more than $1 million, including construction and metering. And so when we pay that, and they need a check from the city before they go and do that, or as they go and do that, so we will have to come out of the city budget for $1 million, whatever, to underground those red lines. And at that point, the city can then turn around to the residents and say, now it's your turn to pay us back. So the undergrounding would then be the burden of the residents of Domrick Estates, or the residents of the next, the other neighborhoods that you pointed out. Or the city could eat the cost. That's how we pay for it is immaterial to Duke. It is material to us because it's a huge part of our budget. So I think that's what we're here to discuss. And so that leads to the question, what's the value of underground? Why would you do that? I mean, if Duke comes in here and says this plan, the no-cost plan, will take care of your reliability problems, and this is what we would do, and we say, well, we think that there's more reliability in undergrounding everything, and I guess the question then comes to us, how much is it worth to us based on reliability to pay for undergrounding? And it kind of goes also, I think, in all fairness, there's an aesthetic part of this question, right? I mean, so who wants to drive down Domrick Drive and see no poles versus see poles? And I would go with no poles, but that's an aesthetic consideration. That's not a reliability. That's not why we got into the business of this. It doesn't mean we can't pay for it, but it's not it was not the impetus for this program to begin with. Doesn't mean we can't change our minds and say it's worth $1 million just to have no poles and perhaps a greater reliability. I don't know the answer to that part. So it seems to me a fundamental part of the discussion has to be an answer to the question, is there any reliability upgrade to undergrounding the red lines, or from a reliability standpoint, should we be satisfied at the plan, no-cost plan to us? And so that's a question for Duke, and I think we'll probably put that question to whoever from Duke is going to stand up and speak in a few minutes. But I just wanted to kind of set that term so everybody understands where we are, and we'll take input in a few minutes. But I just, it's taken a while to get here because it is a confusing situation. But I think that's really the nut of it is, and this is just Dahmer. And again, because Dahmer got in the head of everybody else, this is why we're talking about Dahmer today. But the same question is going to come up for every other neighborhood that has a combination of hardening and underground. Is, we put the same question to every other neighborhood that comes forward and say, do you want to pay? And so I'll just go one step further and then I'll stop briefly. So an assessment would look like this. It would be, the city would pay for it up front. Let's just call it $1.3 million, $1.4 million, whatever it is. The city would pay for it. We would then turn around, and the way a special assessment works is the city, any city in Florida has the authority to assess its residents for an upgrade to their services that benefits that neighborhood, rather than a general kind of taxing wide, benefit to everybody. So in this case, this would be a benefit to the residents of Dahmer, and therefore the city could, if we decided to do so, levy a special assessment on every home in Dahmer to pay back the $1 million. And that would be either an assessment levied on perhaps just the red line homes, or an assessment levied on everybody. So everybody would pay. At that point, if we levied the assessment, it would no longer be a no-cost plan. It would be a plan of, several $1,000s to each home in Dahmer to be paid on your tax bill over time. And that way the city would recoup its $1 million cost. So you would see that, that bill on your tax bill until it's paid off, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, however long the terms are. So I hope that clarified. That's the exercise I have to do in my own head to clarify for myself. I hope that helps you. And if there, we have some more questions for the Duke representatives when they get up, but I just wanted to kind of lay that out. Anybody else have any more questions for Mark?
No, but I guess just a statement, you said we need, we're talking about Dahmer. I really do think we're talking about the hardening. If, we're talking about Dahmer because all this has to be done, Duke wants to know by December 31st what our plan is. So if we're going to say, this is an idea for Dahmer, I think we also need to say it's the same idea for Minnehaha, Shores, Hillman, Trotters area, George, Sibilia, Jim Lake, Grove Street, and Grove Court. We got to count them in also. I mean, we can't do one area and then they're like, what happened with us? So I guess that would be my statement is, we're really looking at 2 million, 1.7, and then if you add in Gem Street and Grove Court, and it's going to probably be close to 2 million, correct? So.
Well, as Mark indicated, that's only what they've told us they're planning on doing. There's also future plans. So if we have a policy and we implement it now, we're essentially bound to that policy for the next set of plans that come along from Duke when they say, here's what we're hardening, here's what we're undergrounding. We're going to be doing this conversation again next year for the same, and we don't know what that includes. That could be a much larger part of the neighborhood, maybe off of Sandsburg, where we are looking at a Dahmer-sized situation.
I think that the issue is that although Dahmer is different, as Mayor Lowndes was suggesting, in the sense that it was on, when we've done other neighborhoods and we don't do everything all at the same time. And so in that sense, it may be justifiable to do a neighborhood or an area differently in terms of a project. However, However, we would not be doing that in these circumstances, rushed, without budget, and all of that. We would do it properly with a budget and all of that. So in order to do it under these circumstances, rushed, without it being budgeted, coming from reserves, all of those things, I agree that because of those circumstances, we would have to look at all the other similarly situated neighborhoods. Because if our justification for going to our general tax base, because that's everybody's money, in this circumstance would be to say, well, because of this special deal, but that special deal applied to everybody. And then what Lindsay's saying is, and what Mark is saying, then we're setting a precedent, and we know that it's going to be implicated again and again, at least to some degree. And so that, to me, is a situation.
And here's my question. We don't know this. We're talking about the first phase of this. So my neighborhood, I just found out Friday that we're getting undergrounded. I mean, I just found out. They just told us so. But I'm very happy, so thank you. I'm very happy. But the thing is, they just hardened my neighborhood. So what's to say that they're not,
When did they do that?
last year?
Huh?
8 months ago? So in my front yard, I have 2 poles. I have a small one and then the taller one.
That's interesting though, because I would think, oh, they just hardened it, then they're not going to ever go back and underground it. But I hear where you're going.
Yeah. So, and the shorter poles already have the 2 lines on it, so I don't know if they take those poles, whatever. I mean, that's probably a question they can answer, but they're coming in and undergrounding. Who's to say that 24 or 25, that's not part of their plan? And are we looking to spend $2 million on something that they may already do? So, I mean, that's another question. There's a lot of questions, I mean, there's a lot to put in on this meeting. That's it for me, Mark.
Okay, would it be appropriate now for Duke to entertain any questions or have a presentation if there is any? I'd love to hear from you.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Eva Leisure. I'm the Director of Engineering for the area, so I'll field any technical questions you may have.
Okay. Eva Leisure, is that? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for coming tonight. So to the question that I was pondering earlier, I guess it's kind of a two-parter. Clearly there was a rationale for Duke to make a distinction between the red lines and blue lines here. And I don't know if that distinction is based on your conclusion that this is what it takes to get to the reliability standard you need, and therefore you don't need to underline the red lines, or and if that is not the case, then my second part of that question would be, what is the reliability value of undergrounding the red lines? So if we're going to pay $1 million to underground, before we do that, we need to know, does it really help the reliability of the aesthetic?
So first I'll say the decision, we would probably love to underground everything that we have, but like you, we have a budget and we can't. Underground is significantly more expensive the materials are and to maintain it after the fact. So we have a budget and we have algorithms and engineers to analyze, the best way to allocate the funds that we have. So that's the first question. And then, is there a benefit to undergrounding the red lines? So it's not a quantifiable benefit that I could say your reliability is 10% greater. So we've storm hardened, we call it storm protection plan. The basis behind it, the thicker, fatter poles, is actually adhering to the National Electric Safety Code, Rule 250B, in which the lines have to withstand, I think in this area is 110 miles per hour winds. So that's how we design the overhead hardening poles. And so the ones that we did this year, we did mostly in DeLand this past year. They have performed very well in the last 2 storms that we've had. So from a reliability perspective, hardening overhead has performed very well because we had a specific project to go out and look at how our storm hardened lines did this past year. So, but from a reliability perspective, it's still overhead, so there's nothing to say that a car can't take out a pole on Domrick Drive and then you're out of power. So to that point, if there's no pole there, no car can take it out. So from an anecdotal perspective, there is a reliability value in the pole not being there. Lines can still take it out. You get a 140-mile-an-hour hurricane coming through here, it's going to take out the overhead lines. If you come down to Horatio, which is where if we undergrounded the 3 red lines, your overhead would be on Horatio. Horatio is a feeder. Typically, our restoration strategy is to put the feeders on first. So again, I can't quantify it, but anecdotally, that's where the reliability would come in. But no car could take out anything on Dominic Drive for 25 years and be fine, so.
Okay. Okay, okay. And so it was a reliability and a budget decision, I guess, for you. As it result in this point. As you said, you don't have an endless budget either, and so. Does anybody else have any?
To clarify, you were speaking about that you prioritize the feeder poles when you're restoring power, so that's the red lines, right?
No, so in our vernacular at the power company, the feeder lines is what comes out of the substation. So transmission lines go into the substation, it's all stepped down to the voltage for your home. So the feeder lines, we call them the trunk lines or the branch lines, those come out of the substation. And then everything that goes off into the individual neighborhoods are all our laterals and things like that. So we prioritize to get all the feeders on first in a storm restoration situation.
So you mentioned that in answering Mary Lam's question, so I wanted to make sure I was connecting the dots correctly. Is that saying then that in terms of anecdotally answering the question about a quantifiable benefit, that those lines, whether above ground or underground, whether hardened or undergrounded, would be prioritized for turning on power anyway? Is that what you're saying? Or
the feeder line is always put on first, yes.
And are those the red lines or
no?
Okay.
So Horatio is a feeder line.
You're speaking only of Horatio. So those red lines are not necessarily
What you call
they're not our feeder lines. So in a scenario, in a Hurricane Ian scenario, there's nothing wrong on Horatio, but a tree came down on Dominic. We're going to come through, we're going to turn on Horatio and make sure Horatio is good. Then we're going to go back, and then we're going to start doing the laterals second.
And I think part of the issue is, well, a lot of the issues, definitely my non-technical speak next to your engineering degrees, but the red lines, they're feeding the blue lines, is that?
Yeah.
Okay. So when they're out, they would affect the other ones?
Yes.
Do any of the blue lines get fed by other red lines, or is it only the one red line feeds the one blue line? I mean, is there like a redundancy or a backup system for some of those side streets?
They will be looped,
Okay.
depending on which way we go, but they're looped on the same red line.
Okay.
So they're just not on the same pole. So I don't know the names of the streets, but it would come in this way and then go up and then come back on the next street. So it would still be on Dominic, and we would have abilities to isolate and those kinds of things to get on as many people as possible immediately. But yeah, they most likely would be fed from the same red line, just in 2 different locations.
So I have another question. On the north part of the neighborhood up there, I mean, it's kind of the north part of Dominic Estates, it's the Geronimo and Thunderbird are up there, and there's no blue line or red line yet in that area. And even though they're part of Dominic Estates, they're not included in the undergrounding and hardening plan. Why is that?
I believe they're on a different feeder, I think, and I would have to double check. I think we included them in the master underground conceptual plan, but I would have to check. But if they're not on this, they're not on feeder 79, which is the feeder that comes along the ratio, and everybody's fed off of that feeder.
Okay, so, but you say developing the master undergrounding plan that
For Dominic. Yeah, the
Okay.
Dominic master plan we came up with to underground.
So those areas, those streets are not on anybody's radar for undergrounding in the future, or are they?
I think they're on 2024 feeder. don't know the plan for that. We included them on the master Domrick plan if we did the whole thing underground. I can't speak for what the plan is next year.
Okay. I've heard from folks who live up there that are concerned that they are not giving to the party that or they got left off that. And I just wanted to see if they have any hope of being underground in those, in future years when we see that is.
I don't want to promise that, but I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. You talked about how the new poles are set to handle 120-mile-an-hour winds. Just wondering, the poles that are probably there today, you think they're set to do 80 to 100, or is it also 120? Like the wind speed?
I don't, and I think I said 110. I don't know. They're not built. I could get into a lot of technical things with you. The rule, the NESC 250B rule, actually has a 60-foot exclusion, and so all the lines prior to this, so nothing that's less than 60 feet in the air has to be built to those standards. So prior to this, nothing was built to the wind standards like that.
Okay, so this is much more of an increased.
It's a much more robust system.
All right. Yeah, because I was looking at Arapahoe, and I noticed everything. I mean, that's a feeder, but then everything's undergrounded off of that. Every house, there's not one home that really gets fed from that one like they do on Domrick, right? So, so would that be a big deal to underground? I mean, you would feel pretty good that that would stand up if, I'm just saying if we, at 900,000, if we looked to keep that one up and it was only 600,000, that wouldn't be problematic, right? Or should it just all be undergrounded? I think I know the answer. So,
I don't know how to answer that because I don't want to be the one to say, oh yeah, that'll be fine, and then the
it's not
hurricane
fine.
comes through and
right.
So yeah.
So my next question is, so everybody knows, in 2035, our agreement with Duke is over, and if we want, we can buy back these utilities, I believe. So that being said, in 2025, if we paid all this money to get all this underground and then we bought it back from you, would we get any kind of credit back for doing the work we're doing today?
That's a deep question.
In government community relations, I would have to look into that if that is a possibility. I know there is a buyout clause for Maitland, so.
Counselor, I happen to know the answer to that one only because I was here when we renewed the franchise.
Yes.
It's just an appraisal process, and you pay what it's worth, and that's it.
And isn't it true that if we do improvements, we're actually increasing that appraisal most likely?
That I can't argue that point.
So then we're just buying back what we're paying for.
We keep paying twice.
Yeah, we're paying twice.
We're buying at least in theory, the convenience of the reliability, and that's what we're buying, but we don't own it.
And I guess my last question is, I spoke earlier and I said, oh, this is a question I'll be asking you. So in the future, could there be where Duke says, you know what, we really need to go in there and underground this, and underground the hardening themselves?
So not in the next 5 to 7 years at a minimum. So the intent behind our strategy at this point is to go into these select neighborhoods. And at this point, I think it's a 10-year plan. We pick a substation and we do everything that comes out of that substation so that we do not have to come back to that area for the next 5 to 7 years. So I don't foresee I don't know the future, but I do not foresee a policy in which we would overhead harden something and then come in and put it underground in the next 10 years.
Okay.
So that definitely leads, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
My question to Mark earlier that he said was a good question. I guess in the sense of, if we said, if hypothetically, we are not in a position because of logistics to approve payment to anything by December 31st. But we really want to do Domrick Estates in the next couple of years. What would happen from Duke's perspective? Is that possible? What would that look like?
Okay, so if we talked Domrick, so we wouldn't come back from our reliability perspective for the next 5 to 7 years. So I would like a really nice guarantee from you that you would do that. So if you said that, we would come in 2023 and do all the blue. We would still underground it, but we would leave the 3 red as they are today. We would not harden overhead and invest all that money to come back and put it underground a few years from now. So that's where the guarantee or it's going to be really nice, because if you said, okay, we're going to do this in 2025 and we're going to budget for that, and then in 2025 you say no, we've moved on and we're already in 5 other substations at that point.
Would we get one of those nice guarantees reciprocally, do you think, hypothetically?
In terms of?
Like if we said, we are very solidly sure, which I don't even know that we can actually do that because of Mark's mention about future councils, but just in the land of pretend, because I love to live there. If we said, yes, we think 2025, we are going to do that, and you said, okay, so we're leaving these red lines, but there is potential for a mutual agreement that yes, then we would definitely put that on the list for 2025.
Absolutely. If you're paying for it, we're coming back and doing it.
That seems reasonable.
Yeah.
But you would still want to know that about the red lines by December 31st.
I would, because if you say no, then I'm going to come in and harden them overhead.
Yeah.
In 2023.
I just wanted to say thank you very much for coming in and giving your time. I mean, there's nothing making you be here. You were nice enough to come in and answer questions, so thank you very much.
I also want to address your neighborhood. I know we hardened, you said that. We hardened the feeder. I know we hardened the feeder in 2021, so we did not we did not underground or harden any neighborhoods. So we're not doing redundant work, I promise.
Okay, all right, thanks for getting that cleared up.
Okay, well, thank you, and if you stick around, we appreciate it, because I think what we're going to do is open it up for public comment, and I'm sure somebody will come up with questions we didn't ask you, and then we can bring it back up and ask you those questions after we do that. So again, the indulgence of the council, we don't typically do it for discussion items, but we can open up a public period. I think some folks want to be heard, and if they have ideas that might be helpful to us, so let's do that. And off the bat, I don't know, we got some preferential speakers here because they got their speaker cards. So we'll go with them first. And Mr. Paul Brennan.
Thank you. Hi, Paul Brennan, 1180 Coburn, Maitland Woods. I'm part of the board there. Just real basic questions. You may have answered these in prior meetings, but the transformers on the existing poles for the neighborhoods that are going to go underground, they're not being debated. Are they being ripped out as you complete the project underground?
Well, I'll ask that because I think we started getting everybody asking everybody questions. It's going to be difficult. So if we can just ask me the question, we'll get around to it.
So that was my first question. The second question is
but the question is, are the transformers just ripped out? You mean that?
Or removed?
Removed. They're not used because they're no longer.
Right. They're not needed. So will they be removed?
Okay.
Okay. So the next question is, I'm confused about the other services, the cable, and which I know is not your problem. But the question is really, are the existing poles in the back of the yards going to remain up? In other words, we're going to have existing poles with phone lines and cable in the backyard, and then a new transformer in the ground up front. So you just want to understand that. what the footprint of transformers would be, is going to be 4 houses, things like that. And then, that's it, those are my
Okay,
questions.
well, I think I can answer the second one unless I get corrected by Duke, but I think what happens is we all have poles in our backyards. When Duke takes the transformer off the pole and puts it runs power through your front yard. So it's power coming from your backyard to your front yard. It's going to be underground at the easement in the front yard. And the poles will be cut off below where the transformer is, but above where the cable currently is. The cable is going to stay there until they decide to underground. But Duke will saw off the poles, I understand it. So you have a shorter pole, but you're going to have a pole, and you're still going to have wires. It won't be your power line. That was correct. Okay. All right. Mr. Doug Weiner.
Thank you. Doug Weiner, 1850 Geronimo Trail. So I've been in the neighborhood since 2002. I voted on the Q1P. It never got funded, but it included undergrounding of Thunderbird, Tuckasegee, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and Geronimo that are on the north side of the neighborhood. We're part of the phase that's also having the underground hardening and the undergrounding. And so I'm just curious how it was possible that we were going to be underground as part of the Q1P when we're not, and we're being excluded now. I understand feeder 79 feeds the neighborhood. I just want some more logistics around what feeders feed Geronimo Trail in the back of the neighborhood. We're kind of an island back there, and we lose power frequently and for protracted periods of time. It seems like we lose it longer than our neighbors to the south of us. And so being excluded and not having a specific timeline for the improvements is a little concerning. So I just wanted some more details around that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Doug. And I think, Ava, you might get back to us with the answer to that question. It didn't seem like you. Okay. She says yeah, she'll get back to us. Okay, thank you. All right. Stephen Shea.
Good evening. My name is Stephen Shea. I'm at 1626 Algonquin Trail. And like you, I've been there since 2003 when we first got the notices, thought we were going underground. I don't have any problems with all of that, but in the flyer that was sent to us, it says the bases and stuff are going to have to be addressed by the homeowners. And if you don't do it, then they'll put a pole in the front yard. So I'm trying to understand, because you had said that there will not be any cost to the homeowners. That's the first one. The second one is I wanted to find out, when the lines are put in the front, I've put in some pavers, and I know I had to sign a thing that anything in the right of way I had to redo. That's fine, I can deal with that. However, the line coming from the right of way to my base will have to go through the pavers that I put in for a sidewalk. So I saw that it's being directional drilled in the previous video or photo. So I'm wondering, is that how the lines are going to be installed underground? Are they going to be directional drill, or are they going to be open cut?
All right, we'll get to that. Thank you. Do you have anything else, Mr. Shea?
No, well, and I just wanted to find out on the line coming from the street to my base, is there a way to coordinate with their power company? I don't care about if they want an easement, because I don't want it right on the property line, because I have a garden there and all this other stuff with my neighbor. Can it be moved off of the property line? Because you're going to have to come in and get easements for that line from the right of way to everybody's base. And so I have no problem coordinating with somebody to give them that easement that doesn't necessarily fall on that line.
Okay, when you say base, I just want to make sure we're talking about that.
That's the meter base.
Okay, all right. So the meter base is on your house?
Yes, okay. Correct. Because I paid to move it underground back in 2004 from the pole through my backyard to a base on the side of my house. So I didn't have the overhead line.
Okay, I understand that. We'll get that. I'll ask you.
That was it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Shea. Mr. Bob Yogi, come on down.
Bob Yoy, 891 Arapahoe Trail. I do have a question, and that is, I thought I read in the reports that if we underground the red lines, that we get a loop system through the neighborhood, which does in fact increase reliability substantially. But I didn't hear any mention of that, or there was some mention that The red lines were a loop system, but your previous report said it was not, that only if they went underground would they be looped. But, and those are the only questions I have, but a couple observations. One, this is about reliability. That's what started, that's what got it going, but it's more than that. It's about the quality of life. It's about the quality of the design environment, the built environment in our city. There's far more to it. We have always, I think, had a sense of wanting to underground, not just Domrick, but really everywhere. We need to move in that direction. We need to make some positive gesture towards really making a difference in the lives of our residents. And I think this is a first step, a first positive step that we've seen. I mean, it's unfortunate that it's sort of come about at the last minute. Oh, by the way, we're going to underground power in your neighborhood next month. Why don't you do all of it or just some of it? But the thing of it is, all these others are out there, so they can be planned for, they can be phased. Even Domrick, I don't know, how long will it take to do Domrick? Will it be done in a year? Can it be paid for next year? There's a lot of things there that need to be addressed. A big part of it is going to be the inconvenience of just having it happen. Let's just do it all at one time. Bite the bullet, go for it. The QNP, there was a 90-some% turnout in voting on that QMP. There was an 80% plus approval of the issues in that QMP. Undergrounding was the key feature of that QMP. And it was the entire neighborhood. So if there's a piece of it that can't get done right now because of whatever reason, it needs to be part of a plan. But I think we, just as a city, need to make some very positive, we're going to advance Maitland, because it affects all of us, not just these neighborhoods, but the entire city. It's our image.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Yohe. Chris Hallenmeyer.
Hi, Chris Hallmeyer, 1065 Tuckasegee. I think my question is already answered by the gentleman at Dronwood Trail. I'm also in that area to the north that seems to be overlooked and forgotten. So that was what came before. So I guess we'll get our answer.
Well, yes, we'll at least pose the question. I don't know if we'll get the answer, but I think the answer may be that she needs to go back and look at more research and figure out what park and when that will come about. But I appreciate you coming up to the second, Mr. Waters.
Thank you.
Questions? Thank you. Okay, and that's all the cards we have. So if you all could just come up one by one and give us your name and your address.
Good evening. I'm Gus Bobus, Jr., 621 Domrick, living here since '95. So first, an observation of what Ava was talking about, the hardening of the poles. Even if you harden the poles on Domrick and Arapahoe to 110 miles an hour, I'm sure they're going to stand up, but it's not the poles that take out the power, it's the trees. And the trees are not hardened to 110 miles an hour or 140. And, so branches, trees come down, they take out the power line. So I know we really can't address that unless we go underground. So you're really only as strong as your weakest link, and the weakest link is the trees in our neighborhood. So I really strongly recommend underground, all the north-south mains. Now, I have some questions. I have a lot of questions, and I apologize that I couldn't get with city staff before this. But and you probably won't be able to answer them now. But this came about quickly. everybody is kind of surprised. I mean, 20-some years ago. And I think I know why it came about. I think it's the infrastructure bill that was passed this past year. I believe, that's my suspicion. So my question for Duke is, where is the money coming from for Duke to do the undergrounding? Is it coming out of their own bank account, or is it being funded by the federal government through the recently passed infrastructure bill? Or is it a combination of both? That's question number one. Number two, is there any opportunity for Duke to go back and get either more funding or some funding from the infrastructure money? It's a big bill, and we all paid for it, or we're going to pay for it.
Our kids are.
Yeah, our grandkids, whatever. Another question for city. Is there any opportunity for the city of Maitland to pursue federal funding from the infrastructure bill for this undergrounding for our portion? I know we don't own that infrastructure, but hey guys, it's worth a try. It can't hurt to ask. Lastly, if there is no opportunity for either Duke or the city to procure additional monies, then I recommend that Duke simply underground each entire neighborhood on the list and defer projects as needed. You know, do it right or just don't do it at all. We were a united neighborhood when we voted for the QMP, and everybody was in on paying for a portion of that. And what has happened in the last few months, unbeknownst to the residents of Domrick, is that we all of a sudden became divided. Red versus blue. There you go. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Camille. I have been in Domrick since '86. I've worked for Florida Power, and Progress Energy, and Duke, and now I work for Pipe. And the problem is, it is the infrastructure bill. They're passing out money like candy. That's why everybody's rush, rush, rush. The other problem is, you put the blue and the red up back in the 50s, when everybody first did air conditioning, it was 2 phases. Everybody's going to a single phase system. So that's why you have so many feeders going in. The one feeder we need is from Horatio to the school. Then we can splinter off from there and get to Derbyshire, and then we can split around with all the sidewalks and all the ladders. We don't have to do 3-phase throughout the neighborhood. It's not necessary. It's not needed. We have to get to the lift station down at the end of Rappa, but everything else is same phase. I mean, everybody keeps repeating the same thing. The QMP, I remember that. I remember reading, I mean, it was going to be $100 a year. You know, $200 a year. So all of a sudden now, I mean, FPL is doing the same thing. They're not charging anything. They're just going in and doing everything. I can show you what it looks like when you have a weather event. And you're going to be going and putting in a junction box. So you don't have a hole in your roof. Because that's what we do. We're capping it off, we're capping the top off, so the next time you have a roof changed out, they can take the weather hazard. Because that's all part of it. All right, they strip out the system. You talk about an underground joint venture with Spectrum and with Central. We did it, we used to do it all the time, and the gas companies. We used to bore everything at the same time, stub everything out. 4 rigs, you go 24 inches, pulling back as many pipes. So there's a lot of different systems, a lot of different things that are going on at the same time. That can be done, but the quick and how rushed this all is just doesn't seem very kosher. But yes, you should do it all. And no, you know, it's not the problem we have. We have tree problems. We don't have people that run into the poles. They're running stop signs.
Can you share with us Could you tell us your last name?
Kohler.
Oh, thank you. All right, thank you for coming up, Paul. Thank you. Yes, sir.
My name is Dennis Edwards. I live at 1771 Tongue Trail, Dunwick, and I've lived here almost 30 years. I remember back when I finally ended up getting all my alarm clocks with battery backup, because every other week the power would go out and I had to set all the flashing clocks, which is really annoying. So I know historically it was before, so it's been a major problem. The other thing is, I think, and I would love to see everything underground and neat and aesthetic. I think everybody would love to see that, but I think the problem is the cost and the delay is going to be prohibitive. Duke is giving us a package deal with the blue lines and the hardening and the red lines. And I see it as a take it or leave it. Take this now, let's get it done, let's get it started next year, and then worry about all the other stuff later on. Additional areas, whatever. I don't think we want to revisit the hardening. I think they're using their engineering technology to come up with what they think is going to be the best way to do it. So my point recommendation is take their offer as is, no caveats, no other exceptions, just let them get started and get the ball moving. This paperwork that was sent out here talking about all kinds of Florida statutes and giving approval and funding and ad valorem taxes, that means it'll be 5 more years before we get started. That's it. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards.
Hi, Diane Burns, 751 Domerick Drive, and been here since 1994. I just have a couple of simple questions about the hardening to try to give myself a clearer picture of it. And I may have missed some of this, so I apologize if I'm redundant, but I hear reference to the lines going vertically instead of horizontally, and I have no picture of how that gets the line from house to house. So I just would like an explanation of that. I think you said the poles are going to be 6 inches wider than what they are now, from 12 to 18, if I understood that correctly. And then how much taller? So just getting an idea of what that actually looks like, I would like to know. I am almost right across the street from one of the 2 lift stations that are at the very far end of 2 of those red lines. So I am concerned. Our street was swimming in it during the end, as were the ladies who spoke to us who live on Arapahoe. I'm very concerned about how we get power to those lift stations. I think that's a primary concern of the infrastructure. So it does concern me that those lines that power those lift stations are still above ground.
Thank you, Ms. Burns.
Good evening. My name is William Brown. I live at 341 Domerick Drive. It's been my residence for 38 years, a little over that. Prior to retirement, I was with Time Warner Cable for 21 years. 11 of those years I was president of the Florida division. So I'm reasonably familiar with cable, with the construction of them and the maintenance of them. But I've been retired for over 20 years, so I haven't kept up. If I make some statements tonight that are no longer true, I'll apologize in advance. It's not my intention to give out false information. I'm disturbed about a couple of things. That this Duke Power is a great company, but they're a monopoly. I'll say that again, they're a monopoly. There's no other game in town. And as a monopoly, they're required to provide us regular, good service. If they aren't making enough money, there's a board in Tallahassee that regulates their rate. And I believe they're guaranteed a return on their investment. I'll say that again, guaranteed a return on their investment. I don't know of any other private enterprise or public enterprise that's guaranteed other than the utility. For those reasons, if they don't have enough money, aren't making enough money, I think they should go to Tallahassee and ask for more money. I don't believe the city should contribute money to whatever it is they're going to do here. I apologize for that. Nobody knows.
Better answer.
Secondly, I've tried to review the information that's available, and I noticed an absence of the mention of telephone or cable. And both of those facilities will be seriously impacted by a big change that you're now contemplating. And I think you really need to bring them into it. Their grids don't match the power grid, so if they change this, it's going to affect a lot of things. I'm not in a position to say what they are. In closing, I want to say I haven't been as active as I should have been. I want to thank you all for taking your time to serve the interests of the city. I'll caution you to take a hard look at recommendations from the staff. Please don't let Duke Power sell them a bill of goods. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Does anybody else like to address?
Does this work over here?
Oh, here you go.
Hello, I'm Alan Thatcher. I live at 1685 East Horatio. So one of my concerns is everything in this report says that they're not doing anything with Horatio, but one of the blue lines run behind me. So I just want to make sure that there's a list that shows the addresses of the houses that are going to get underground. So I don't want to be connected to nothing. So hopefully we can get that worked out. But then
Your parents stays on all the time, doesn't it?
What's that? So, okay, so anyway, my power goes out all the time, so I do have a nice generator. Unfortunately, I invested in it, but hopefully I don't have to use it next year. But looking at the plan that Duke has put forward here, I think we should move forward with it. It looks like a good plan. It's going to basically give us power, and it's going to harden the lines and give some people some opportunities to not lose power as much as they do now. Also, if you look at all the blue lines that go east and west, there's probably a lot of trees that fall there, and that's going to limit the amount of outages we have just because of that fact. So I would say we should accept the plan, move forward, and not increase taxes. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Thatcher. Does anybody else like to address this issue tonight? Of course. See some people haven't spoken yet. All right. Well, let's close the public hearing and see if anybody, do you want to take some of these questions, or somebody else from Duke? I think there might be a few we can run through. Okay, I've got a list, and I maybe Mark, you probably get better list than I do. But Paul Brennan asked, are you just going to remove the transformers? I think what he meant was just remove them from the current poles from backyards.
They'd be removed from the overhead power poles, but we would need easements to put the equipment, the underground equipment, on somebody's yard.
Okay.
Yes.
So you as I understand that means you'll swap out your backyard easement for a front yard easement that you'd have to get, and then there are facilities we put in the front yards.
There'd be underground transformers throughout, yeah.
Mayor, just for clarification, there's not an easement swap. The easement, the rear yard will remain.
Okay.
Easements,
okay, and I did my best to answer the second one, but I might have misspoken. The cable poles will stay in the backyards, or the poles that, I mean, currently everybody's got poles that have transformers up high and then cable and phone down below. What happens with those poles?
So they stay. I was whispered in my ear that we no longer top them. I don't know that, but yeah,
means you don't cut them off. They're made as it is.
Until everybody else gets off, and then they get pulled.
Okay, yeah, so could you speak to that for a second? So they're not there eternally.
If the other third-party attachers go underground, and there's, yeah, we can remove the poles. Yes.
Okay. So you would remove your transformer and your lines from the backyard, and the pole would stay there until such time as the cable and internet provider also underground. And that's something that our staff has reached out to Spectrum, and so we just have to work that out. I think that's the answer to your question.
Thank you.
Okay. And Mr. Weiner and Mr. Hellmeyer both had a question about Geronimo and Thunderbird, which is that
I took
northern.
that note, I will look it up.
Okay, so yeah, we'll figure out why they're not on this list. Okay. Mr. Shea asked about and this kind of goes to a little bit further into the point that, so if there is, Mr. Shea, I think, said he had already undergrounded from some point to his base meter. And so what happens in that case?
So without seeing it, I would imagine you would just stay like that, and we would connect you to whatever design we already
It's
have.
coming from the pole in the back, so you
Oh,
can't
in the
do
back,
that.
okay,
So
yeah, no.
you're gonna have to run it from the front, or you're
Yes.
gonna have to have in the right of way or an easement all along the front for your lines. And then from there to the base, I just want to coordinate with someone, because you gotta have an easement to put that in to maintain it, because you're responsible to the meter. So I understand all that, because I'm kind of in the civil engineering field, but I want to coordinate with you because I've got a sidewalk and such that I would want to coordinate where that goes, and I'll be happy to give you the easement, so that I don't have to tear up a paver walk that I just put in 5 months ago, 6 months ago.
So that gentleman right there, his whole job is to make sure all our customers are happy.
Are you ready to answer?
That question. You know, it sounds like we coordinate on that, and at some point, I'm assuming y'all will reach out to all the homeowners. And then the last one was the cost for the base. Now, I think I'm already there, I don't have that issue, but the way the mayor said it, there was no cost for this, but then in the flyer, they said there was a cost. So I think that getting it from the right of way to my house, it appears that there's a cost based upon the flyer that was sent out. But the mayor in his description earlier said there was no cost. So I'm trying to understand that, because in 2003, when they talked about this, there was a number thrown out about $3,800 to take it underground and bring it to our house. So I'm trying to understand what that is.
Yeah, if I just jump in, because I think what the issue was is that you would give the easement from the front yard to your base on the side of your house, and you would have to then bury it. If somebody said, no, I'm not going to give the easement, then you're stuck with your power in the front yard. And in that case, you would put a pole to their weatherhead where it is now. But if you want to give an easement, you'll pay for the conversion to bring it from the street to the base.
That's what I want to know.
It is we don't force anybody to participate in the undergrounding, hardening that we do. So we have had scenarios in which there's one hole in the whole neighborhood and it's no ground. Is that person?
Okay, so because you're responsible from the meter to your power line, so I'm assuming that's where you're saying you'll cover that cost. Okay.
Okay, Bob Yohe had a question, and so what I wondered about as well. I heard early on that there is a reliability factor we haven't discussed about, which is that if you were to underground the red lines, that you would actually loop in from another substation or something like that. There would be one of the advantages of doing that would be you would have another access to power. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, the master conceptual plan tied you up there, tied you in up at the north end somewhere. I'd have to look at how the overhead is fed right now, if you're connected to that feeder in the back also. So I don't know who asked the question, but I couldn't specifically speak to how you're looped overhead or redundant overhead. But policy-wise, we don't duplicate overhead, obviously, half as much as we do underground. So you could have a whole, double span line overhead, because it's a lot easier to fix overhead because you can see the problem. When underground is out, it's out. And so we redundant feed underground because we can immediately isolate the problem and feed as many people as we can. So a lot of overhead is not tied in and looped and refed as much as underground is. If that makes sense.
Bob, does that help?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Gus Bovis had several questions. One is the infrastructure bill one of the sources for your funding for this? And if not, can Duke get some infrastructure bill money?
I'm just a technical person.
So I know that is a question, but this was part of our storm protection plan and budgeted by Duke Energy, and we have received no federal dollars through the infrastructure bill to IIJA. I know that is available grant to many municipalities if we're willing to partner, if you want to go for those federal grants through ARPA and IIJA. But this particular program, I know it sounds like it's quick, but these were at the request of just wanting to, like some of you have said, yes, this was our storm protection plan hardening project, and why not do it all at once? So that's why we, put this whole plan together for Domrick and other areas. But just to be clear, Duke has not received federal funding through these infrastructure bills. So.
Okay, and just to follow up on that, and you think the municipalities have access to that money?
Absolutely.
So we could get a grant to upgrade the Duke system?
Just to clarify, before we get too far down this road.
Yeah, we do have one of our team members that is St. Pete that is well versed in that. I know it can be very cumbersome to apply for these grants, but it might. I don't know if that would qualify, but I'm happy to connect the city with
Appreciate that.
our team members.
Just remember, the IIJA money was the former transportation money. From what I'm seeing, when I know of that bill, it is almost exclusively transportation related. The infrastructure is transportation related infrastructure.
Okay, but it could not hurt to get in touch with your team member from St. Pete to see if there's a way to access what is, which I know there's a lot of federal money out there now. ARPA, IIJA, there's, so yeah, I think it's worth, thank you for that. And we will ask you for the team members' contact so you can run that down. And I think that goes to Gus's third question, which is, can the city pursue the funding? And I think, conceptually, this is Duke's system, so we don't have ownership of it, we don't own the system. So, but if there is a way, we can partner with Duke to get a municipal grant to upgrade the system. It's worth looking into. So we'll look into that. And that ties back into Mr. Brown's question earlier. And I think Mr. Brown, William Brown, was talking about the PSC and getting your rates adjusted to the PSC so that you can pay for some of this. And it sounds like your answer to that question was that's what we've already done. You already went to the PSC and got a rate increase, so we've already been paying for it. And so this is the result of the rates that we've already been paying. Is that what you said earlier? This was you had been to the PSC and gotten a storm hardening rate increase or something, and that's where you have the money to pay for this?
Yeah, that's part of the storm protection plan. And just to clarify too, the lateral hardening underground will continue regardless. So that is still part of our plan.
Okay. I think that was. Okay. Diane Burns, am I missing anybody? Did Camille Kohler or Dennis Edwards have any questions? I don't believe so.
I just want to ask, what's the cost difference between overhead and underground? Because that's how it used to be, because
Okay.
the power company has.
Yep, yep. There's a cost difference between overhead and underground. I mean, I guess that's kind of like a rule of thumb per mile, or do you have something like that?
Like to the customer or the material?
That's how it used to go. It used to be because you have to supply power to the customer. You're required, right? So if they wanted underground, they would have to pay the difference between
That's-
overhead.
It's a little bit of a different, that's a net new meter, like a new building, or, so it's outlined in the tariff. So the new, John Smith is building a new home and he wants overhead versus underground, yeah, there's a 4 to run cost for this, and then, but yeah, they pay the cost differential.
But you're going to come in and bring in the total.
A municipality conversion is different. It's an existing service that's going from overhead to underground versus a net new construction that would be underground. Like a net new subdivision is different from a municipality conversion.
So Diane Burns had a couple of questions, and they were kind of technical questions, which I believe will be right up your alley. So the first was, and this is a difficult thing to conceive, what these hardened lines will go in with just vertical lines and not horizontal lines, which everybody says, well, of course they're vertical, and that's what I thought it was too. So as I understand it, really the difference is where as you go down Arapahoe, you go down Dalbert, now you see a lot of poles that have their teeth, more or less, and they have crossbars, and so they have lines that are along the crossbar going to the next one and meet up right there. Is it the case that hardening really is just where you put a single pole, and there's wires in between, there's no longer the cross T to catch vegetation that comes down? The idea is to avoid that?
That's part of it. Our Duke Energy Florida standard has been, as long as I've been with the company, has been vertical. So horizontal, and our partners in North Carolina do mostly horizontal, but that is one of the benefits. So if they're horizontal, so the 3 lines are going this way, things can land, things can nest, versus if it's this way and they're 1, 2, 3 this way. The 3 lines go this way. Does that make sense?
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they're just on top of each other versus this way.
So if you put new poles down, Governor Tribe, they would no longer have those cross T's, they would just be a single, I mean, they would be just like running a needle rig. And also, what are the difference in sizes between the poles? The old pole versus the new pole, width and height?
I don't know specifically the width. I think we said about 6 inches or so. The height, they're typically going 5 feet higher. So yeah, they're typically, if they're 45-foot poles right now, they're about 5 feet in the ground. So we'll be putting in 50s. So it'll just be about 5 feet higher.
Concrete?
No,
Wood?
They're concrete poles?
they're wood. They're not.
Wood. Okay. I think that's all the questions I got. Did anybody else have any?
Can I ask one more?
Mr. Thatcher, Al Thatcher wanted to know if there would be a list of street addresses.
Right. So we're looking at kind of just big picture diagrams of these neighborhoods. Are we're going to have any information on like street addresses? And I think Mr. Thatcher wanted to make sure he knows where he's on what list.
You're on the list.
If I live with one address, I could look you up, but I don't know that I know every address in Domrick or things like that, so that's why we've kind of been going by streets. But if there were specific residents that had specific questions, I'm sure we could field those questions and figure it out.
I do have one thing, I believe it was from last time, we discussed just along those lines of theoretically delaying red lines. For example, that there was a cost savings in tariff, I believe you were discussing that say we did delay it, that cost savings would be gone.
That cost savings is gone only if we harden the line overhead.
Right, so if we didn't do anything and then later we paid to underground, would we still be paying a difference, or would we just be paying that full undergrounding price tag?
You would still get the same benefit of this new change in the tariff calculation. So it's roughly 900,000 per Domrick. So let's just say there's zero inflation now until 2025. It'd be still the exact same calculations, it's still 900,000.
Okay.
So that doesn't change. It only changes if we harden the line overhead, and then some of the additional line items go back into the calculation. In this case, But I think the difference was substantial. So I think 1.9 million versus 900, or 1.8 million, I think. So it was roughly double.
Thank you.
Okay.
I have one more question.
Mr. Chair, give you the last word.
All right. On the cost, since I had to sign a waiver to the city for my pavers in the right of way, okay, so that if somebody like this came in and wanted to do the work, I have to put the bill to replace them. I'm trying to find out if y'all are going to do open pit trench or directional drill, because I need to budget, just like the city's trying to budget their 900,000. I need to budget to redo my driveway if it's an open trench.
What's your answer?
I'm in the same situation. I have to budget $3,000 or $4,000 for driveway to redo pavers, just like the cities has to come up with 900,000 if they want to go underground.
So for our portion of the project where we are, the blue lines.
Yes, I'm
So
in the blue
Duke-
lines.
Your blue line. So Duke is paying and doing that connection. So if that needs to get adjusted for your sort of into the back lot, connection to your meter, now it's going to go front line. So Duke is going to figure that out. So if we have to cut something, if we have to move pavers, anything like that, that's something that Duke is going to absorb.
Okay, that's my question, because the city made me sign a waiver that said I would, if anything was done in the right of way, I was going to have to get that. That's what I'm trying to find out.
Well, where the Duke is doing all of that work, so everything on the blue, Duke is doing all that, so there's not going to be a pass along. There has to be an extraordinary circumstance or something that would have to create
All right.
something, so I'm
It's
not
not
speculating on that right
budget,
now.
This is what I'm hearing.
Okay. Great. So I think that does it. Thank you all for coming out and answering the questions and helping us get our arms around this project, this series of projects. This is back to us, and staff is looking for requested action. We're in a discussion mode as well, so I don't believe we're going to take a vote tonight. We're down a council member who is important for any final decisions, I think, as well. So we're not in a posture to take a final decision on this, but we should discuss what those options are. And so I think you've got it here. We allow Duke to do what they propose to do at no cost to us. We could ask Duke to pay for the whole thing and see how long that would take to negotiate that, or the city could pay for it, which comes in two flavors. The city pays for it all, and just that's a general fund issue, and I'm not sure that may be a legal matter, whether we can do that, because it does have a special benefit to a particular neighborhood rather than a citywide benefit. In that case, do we assess the neighborhood for the construction and meter conversion costs, which would be over $1 million? And that would be a binding action that we would take through a series of meetings to levy the special assessment. That's kind of a statutory-driven process we'd have to go through, and that involves more public hearings and sitting as an equalization board. So none of this is going to happen without lots of public input and visibility. So that's it. I think we're getting more and more information. I think people are more comfortable with what's going on here. I hope that the residents are somewhat satisfied with the answers that we have and understanding the project further. But it'll be interesting to hear what do we think are our options and where do people think we need to go to come to a conclusion about this, because we ultimately really have to do that pretty soon. Does anybody have any thoughts about that?
So one of the things that was said was, let's come back to it and see if we can underground the red lines later. And I just want to talk to that. So, I mean, if we were looking to do that, we know it's going to be close to $2 million for the citywide. So we have to budget that, and to budget that to have an increase for $2 million for 23, 24, 25, when I mean, we got to really look into the future. You can't just say 1 year. Would there be a tax increase to get that money to budget that money?
Well, it depends on how you approach it. You could have a millage rate increase to pay for that. It's either a millage rate increase or you're dipping into your reserves, again, like I said before. Just to give you perspective, this year, after operating expenses in the general fund, we had a little over $2 million for general fund capital. That's street paving, sidewalks, parks, boardwalks, bike trails, everything that comes out of our general fund. Those things aren't utility related. So we had $2 million left over after operating expenses there. So if you wanted to add to that, there would be a commensurate, I could do the calculation right now because I don't have our total taxable value and how that would relate to the millage rate. There would be, you could do a tax increase to pay for that portion of that, an extra $2 million, as you said. So that could happen. Or you can continue to dip into reserves till your reserves are depleted. Really the two options.
There could also be, I mean, the way I see it, I don't think it's feasible to do all of this extra stuff now for all the financial reasons that have been discussed. So I was asking the questions to kind of understand what the option might be in terms of holding off on that. I think that if you hold off, then you have the other options open back up in terms of special assessments and things like that because you're holding off. And then different neighborhoods could deal with it differently. Some neighborhoods, obviously we know that one of the neighborhoods who cares, or many people who care very deeply, others may not feel the same way. That being said, what I hear in the answers and non-answers to different questions is that would be a risk to say, as a neighborhood who's on the red line, we're going to forgo the benefit, because there is some benefit, I think, it sounds like, objectively, to being hardened from what they have, saying we're going to forgo that right now on a hope and a prayer that 11 other things are going to happen to get us a better result. And are the people in that neighborhood willing to take that risk? I don't know, on those red lines, but I feel like that's kind of the other part of that is that they're taking a risk by delaying those red line projects. Does that make sense?
So then just holding off, and then we have time to go back to what John said, if we want to do an assessment, then also that's another option.
It would be an option if you held off, because the primary reason why we can say assessments are not really an option is because of all the pesky statutory regulations and steps and publication and all that just wouldn't be plausible by December 31st deadline. But I don't think, personally, I would feel comfortable saying, let's delay all those without having a lot of feedback, as Mayor Lenz is saying, from residents saying, we really want you to not act on, we want you to try to get you not to improve something that they want to improve with hope that we will later improve it better. I mean, I don't feel like as a policy decision, it's a great policy decision. So I think it's a preference of residents who are on the red line specifically. I don't know what they would.
Well, and I think you bring up a really important point, which is, we're talking really specifically about one neighborhood because that has come up over and over and over again. But the project list actually is not just one neighborhood. It's a much larger group of several different neighborhoods. Well, we don't have people here tonight from most of those other neighborhoods giving us their thoughts and their concerns. So, Harding and Minnehaha Shores is on there. I don't know that anyone in the room here is actually from Minnehaha Shores. Okay. Great. Fabulous. It's nice to know we have people here who are actually here. But we didn't actually put this whole conversation out to the entire city, right? So I'm concerned about making decisions that are so very microscopically specific to one neighborhood and to, within that, an even smaller subset of residents within that particular neighborhood and binding all of us to that decision. Because ultimately the funding, if we went forward with it, comes from the entire city. So how do our neighbors and residents over on Keller Road feel about paying for undergrounding for a neighborhood on the opposite side of the city, which does not benefit them? So I have concerns about how we do this when we have a great representative group here, but it's representative of one very small subset of everybody who will be impacted by this. So I feel like we don't have, we have to weigh the voices in the room proportionally to what we actually have to make a decision based on for the entire city, not just for one particular project or one particular part of the whole project.
I would, one thing we can do, I think regardless of what anything else happens with it, is we can look into getting with Duke's team member from St. Pete who might be able to point us in the direction of some federal money that might help with that. I mean, that certainly would help. So I don't know if we can make sure that happens.
I would agree with that.
And because that's an area that needs a little more exploration, which might mitigate some of the funding pain we would feel from doing this. Like I said, we're not in the posture tonight to make a decision about whether we're going forward on anything or not, and I don't think Duke is expecting an answer from us tonight, although it's going to be expecting an answer very shortly. And I think also that the statutory assessment issue is not as onerous as it may have seemed at first. I think that there is some, I don't think those timetables are as restrictive as we think. So there may be some relief there, and we could ask Cliff about that. But I'm not saying that's not a concern still, because that's certainly something we have to go through all those processes before. And you don't want to get into a project first and then figure out how to fund it later. It's never a good plan. So that's what we're going to have to figure out is who's going to pay for this if we want to do it at all, and think about it in global terms of all the neighborhoods that we've already got the list for 2023, as Lindsay points out. There could be another long list for 2024, and perhaps years thereafter. So this is a precedent-setting move for us, and we need to. And we didn't, spend a lot of arduous time setting up the budget, and the budget does not include these items, which is so we're going to have to go back and revisit that and figure out how to kind of pay for it. Mark, what more would you like from us? I know that you'd like us to kind of give you an idea about which way to proceed. What would be helpful from a staff perspective at this point? I mean,
if you need additional information, it would be helpful to know what that additional information is to inform the process, your decision-making process. Beyond that, the clock is ticking.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, and I think some of the additional information will be, whether there is access to the federal funding out there. So, in that answer, I don't know how difficult it is to come to an answer on that, but we need to start looking at it. And I think your contact from Duke can help us with that.
Mayor, if I may, we've got our three options sort of up there, kind of spelled out for us. And I would say address each project street independently and fund individually is probably our least likely option at this point. I would say if we have to kind of get ourselves down into eliminating options or giving Mark a better idea of where we need to go, that seems to be the least palatable, because I think on our timeline that's basically impossible, and it doesn't put us in a better position by trying to do that. So I would say if we can knock an option off and try and get closer to clarity, I would suggest we knock that off as one of our options.
I would support you on that one.
Yeah, that makes sense. One of the other issues that we kind of glossed over, we didn't gloss it over, and I think it was given due consideration in the presentation, but there's a lot of the hard lighting that could just go forward with. I mean, it seems like the real issue is in neighborhoods where there's a high hybrid solution being put forward by Duke, which is some underground and some overhead or hardening. That's where we're figuring out how to fund the delta there. So that's what's giving us most pause. I think there are a lot of hardening projects that are going to go ahead anyway. And in these neighborhoods where, unless we need to put out the word to those neighborhoods and say, you're just going to be hardened unless you have a different option. And some of these are, like down the road, where it would be probably prohibitively expensive to do any hardening of those main feeder lines down Horatio. I mean, I don't think we have, it doesn't seem to me we have the money to even. Yeah, it would be a big number. I'm not sure that we want to go there. I like the idea of not looking at power lines all the time. I think everybody does, but there is a limit to the ability to underground those things. So, Mark, to say we don't know what the number on that is. Is there a rule of thumb we can get from Duke on that? Perhaps that'll help us get an order on that. Duke, do we have any? So we're talking about the hardening projects that are on the main roads. Where the feeders are. As I recall, last meeting, you said that's a lot, that's a big number. Perhaps you don't want to go there, but how big a number is that? That might help us.
1.5 a mile.
1.5 million a mile?
And that's the difference between your overhead hardening and what our undergrounding cost would be, or is that your just raw
That's
cost?
just the undergrounding, the raw cost.
So, roughly undergrounding Horatio from 1792 east to Seneca would be $1.5 million. That's a mile more. So that's the raw cost, but what would we pay for that?
Yeah, if you were going to, since you are hardening it, if we would choose to underground that, then you would apply you'd have to go back and apply the formula to that.
Yeah.
Okay. So that information would be helpful too.
But that might be something that they come up with next year, they might present to us.
No, we're not coming back.
Nope, not on that one.
Oh, is that on there now? I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me. That's on Horatio hardening right now?
That's this.
Oh, that's this go?
Right
All right,
now.
apologies.
Yes. Everything we're talking about tonight is scheduled to begin January 1.
Not even enough material right now.
Is there a qualification on that?
Well, I have pushed your feeder back because of all of these decisions, so we're kind of starting with other feeders, and so we're.
Okay, so the
We've
clock.
asked the contractor to wait as long as possible on this feeder, so.
And one of our other problems is we're running up to the end of the year here, and so this is our only meeting in November.
Yes.
And we typically meet every other Monday, but we're only going to meet once in December because of the holidays, as I understand, right?
That's correct.
Meeting, which compresses all of this into a time when people are otherwise occupied as well. So we don't meet again regularly for another month. Is that right?
Yeah, first meeting of December.
Okay. Well, as I said, this is a discussion item tonight. I think we discussed it thoroughly. I think we need to come back and figure out more funding opportunities, perhaps from the federal government, and if not, how we would, how we would pay for the assessment or the cost. I would ask this question about assessments. I mean, what neighborhoods have we done that recently? Do you recall anything going? I know we assessed Greenwood Gardens for the cost of their
meter conversions. Yeah.
So historically, Greenwood Gardens went underground, and we assessed them the cost of their meter conversion, and basically, so each house pays over time for the meter conversion. So we haven't done a lot of special assessments in Maitland, and this would be, I'm trying to think of a way through this. I don't, you want to be fair to everyone at the public hearings, and if, we have a lot of people who are for it, then it makes sense. If there are a few people for it, and a lot of people don't want to be burdened by an assessment, then they need to be heard too. And we're not in that posture. We're not having a public hearing on an assessment, so it's not what we're here about tonight. We're here about the information of how it's gets.
But we're at that point where we have to make a decision almost, right? Because if we decide to go forward with saying, because really ultimately Mark is asking us to make a policy decision. He needs to know, right? So if we say, yes, we will go ahead and figure out how to pay for undergrounding all of it, then we have to move really quickly because Duke is expecting a check from us as a city on December 31st, right? Isn't that basically it? So between now and December 31st, we have to figure out how to pay for it. And if we don't, if we're gonna have to stroke the check in order to pay for it, that's the entire city paying for that check. So then retroactively, after we've already delivered the money, we now have to figure out how to assess our residents. And if we have a, just hypothetically, playing in hypothetical land, we have a public hearing in January and we have residents show up and they are livid that we have made this decision without their input and we're telling them we're special assessing them. Well, what, we suddenly now are going, well, never mind, we're not going to special assess you, we're going to eat this? I don't see how we can, I mean, we're being put on an impossible timeline to make this decision, as Lori said, but we also, we don't have enough information and we don't have enough time to be able to go through this process in any deliberate way where if we say, yes, we will go ahead and pay for this, the mechanism for how we would go about doing it, which, you know, can be clearly spelled out with the statutes is great, but the implementation of literally having to hold a public hearing where we're telling people how we're going to special assess you, and then saying, well, I didn't sign up for that, I didn't get an opportunity to know about it, this wasn't a public hearing, this is a discussion item on an agenda, there was no opportunity to be heard, I didn't know about the meeting, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now here we burden people with a decision that wasn't really a decision, it was a discussion. So I'm worried about how that would impact the people who aren't in the room tonight, because we, again, only have one more meeting and we have to write this check by the end of the year if we're going to do it. So I'm trying to back us into a solution which makes sense, and I don't know how we get there.
Well, I think that it would start off with a resolution. We would have a resolution that proposed to assess people for their, and I'll let Cliff speak to this, but as I understand it, well, first you start off with an ordinance giving yourself the authority to do so, because there is some question about whether we would qualify under the statutes once the action is already taken. So we would come up with an ordinance that basically would just give the city under its own rule authority the power to make an assessment on individual homes. That's step one, and that's an ordinance, and that would take 2 hearings.
Yes, and given the meetings left, you probably just do a special meeting, do the second reading, so you can get it on the book.
Right.
The best way to explain this in a simple fashion is you have 2 ways of going forward, and we've talked a lot tonight in general about the statute. Forget that one. It's not going to work. What is going to work is your home rule authority to adopt an ordinance that puts it in your toolbox. Whether you ever use it for this or any other project, it gives you the tool that, whether it's for undergrounding or street lighting, that's a special thing, or something else, to special assess for it because you have an ordinance under home rule that allows you to do it. So that's step one. And regardless of this project, if this wasn't here, the way to analogize it would be in the past, certainly at cities that Mark has been at, and I think we actually might have done this here too, we have talked about economic development incentives, which we don't have to offer, but we have it in our toolbox as a possibility to offer with the right kind of development. So regardless of Duke and undergrounding, that's something to consider. And that's an ordinance after that's adopted. Then, because of the way it works as opposed to the way the statute works, you could literally special assess if you chose to do so after the project gets built. That's a different consideration from the politics involved, because after something's put there, people are less enthusiastic about paying for it that way. But you have the option to do it, the speed of which is up to you guys. And again, analogous to, and in fact I think I learned this from the mayor when I was a baby government lawyer, the idea of something by statute called the Local Government Development Agreements Act, which we never use because it's a pain in the neck, versus using our home rule authority to enter into separate development agreements with developers. And so that's kind of the analogy here. And that's the way we would go about it if we were going to do a special assessment. And again, without regard to this project, that's something you may want to consider just so you have that tool available for other projects.
And that's kind of why I've been saying impossible, or not possible, because in my mind, to me personally, sitting here in my role, these things are not possible. Chapter 170, I hear, which is our own current mechanism, for special assessment in terms of what, without an ordinance, is not plausible based on timeframes and things like that. I personally would have a huge problem, not in addition to what Lindsay's saying of the possibility, even if an ordinance empowered us to do so, of discussing it after we've already initiated the project, but also I hear what Cliff's saying is like, we also, separate from this, may want to pass such an ordinance in the future, and that's a different animal.
Yes.
But to do so as part of a discussion, basically to empower us to retroactively avoid a statute. That's how it seems to me. I don't like the idea of that as a way to empower us to assess people who didn't essentially agree to that. Does that make sense? I don't like the optics of that at all.
Yeah, essentially that's the politics, but again, critically important, the ordinance just gives the option to have the discussion. The discussion would then almost assuredly involve a whole bunch of people out here telling you why it's a good idea or a bad idea. But I mean, I'm just using the common sense analogy that after something is built, you may get more pushback than what's it going to take to get it built. Based on what I heard tonight, I think that seems to be accurate.
And once you have that ordinance in place, would you follow Chapter 170 or just as a guideline, or would you follow it?
As a guideline. In fact, drafting the ordinance in terms of putting in the safeguards and the guardrails, it would be very similar, but it wouldn't have the same constraints. So, you know, in a development agreement, we put in deadlines for completion, we put in milestones along the way, so a lot of that stuff would be there, but what's not in there, in a development agreement, using that example, is statutorily required notification to the state at certain time frames and various other things. So you take away some of those things because you don't need them. But in terms of having a legal assessment, one that's going to stand up, even under your statute, under your ordinance, you're going to have to consider things like how is the assessment calculated so it's fair, so it actually represents a benefit to the property owner that's proportional to the amount of the assessment and all that kind of stuff. And that goes into the study for how you would come up with the number that home A pays versus home B when they may have a little bit different benefit, whether they're red or the blue.
Because the difference between funding it, being able to fund this at some way, somehow, later past December 31st or ordinance or whatever, but as Lindsay's saying, we have to agree to it by December 31st. And if we agree to it, we are signing a check essentially, whether figuratively, literally, or both. And special assessment may work out for any of these given reasons, or it may not. And then we're still on the hook. And by we, I mean all of us in Maitland. And so, to me, that is why it's not a feasible option by December 31st to sign on to all of this. I agree with Lindsay that I don't see a reason to kick the can further and to at least give everyone in this room and Maitland at least a solid answer instead of continuing to kick the can, because I just don't think it's plausible. I don't understand how it is.
I think any time that you have to make a rush decision, it's a bad decision. So, I mean, I don't feel comfortable really.
I feel like the best thing to do is to wait the time to be able to have control over our own utilities.
So
I would like to find out what Duke can bring to the table though for funding still.
Okay. Well, let me come at it from a different way. If we were to do, I'm just using Delrick because I'm familiar with it and it's in front of us, but it goes to any neighborhood that's on the list for 2023 and 2024. What is required for a good decision before people are going to open their own personal checkbooks on this is kind of an exhaustive, not exhaustive, but a thorough information session where everybody understands what's going on. I think we have a good turnout tonight here. There's hundreds more people who live in Delrick and hundreds more people who live in Minnehaha Shore. They're not here and probably don't know about it. I think this got some Facebook traction in a single Facebook page, but it's in no way what would happen. In Greenwood Gardens, for instance, it took us years to get the neighborhood up to speed. That's a small neighborhood. I mean, get that neighborhood up to speed so they understood, so they could make an informed decision about whether they wanted to assess themselves just for the payment of the conversion. I mean, so the meter conversion, and that, you know, was I don't know, was it $3,000 a home, or
I think
$1,800 a home? So I mean, that took our city staff a lot of boots on the ground time, going out, talking to people in the neighborhood, having neighborhood meetings, having, you know, I think that I mean, for those who remember the QMP, was how the QMP got through. I mean, it was done by a lot of face-to-face meetings, a lot of, you know, charrettes, a lot of people talking about it, a lot of people, you know, finally, you know, prioritizing what they wanted, agreeing that they would pay for it. I mean, so when you got back a 90% positive approval rate from a good chunk of the neighborhood, you feel comfortable then laying the assessment on people. I don't think we're going to come in here on, you know, December 14th, whatever our next meeting is, and say, hey, you know what, I think we had a couple of good Facebook exchanges, we're going to do, you know, we're going to have an assessment on everybody. I just don't think it's fair. So it would just take a while. So that aligns with Duke's timetable, and it puts us in a difficult position. And, you know, and it also jumps over the first question, which is it a good idea to do it? And I think people have very strong opinions about that. We've heard people say that yes, it's good to underground because it's good energy-wise, it's good aesthetically, and others say, listen, you know, it's not that important. I don't, you know, people who live on the blue line don't want to write an extra check, and we're happy with Duke's assessment that, you know, we're going to get reliability out of the plant that costs us nothing. And those are both are reasonable positions, but we haven't gone into the neighborhoods and heard from everybody, or taken a vote, or had a survey, or, you know, any of that kind of thing, which I think is, before anybody feels comfortable up here doing an assessment, I think that's the kind of, I think it's what I'm hearing, and that's the way I feel. You really need to get out there and find out what people, do they agree to be taxed that way? Not just because we made a decision and we're going to follow it up with it. And the alternative to that is just having the city pay. And from a budget perspective, I mean, we're looking at a $2 million cost for 2023. And what's our general revenue budget is $32 million, or?
But most of that's operating.
Right, I'm saying, yeah, I'm taking a, proportionally, it's way out of whack with how we can actually fund this. So we would have to find either more federal money to fund it, or we would have to get the residents to help with that lift, or to take the lift. And this has come on us in a hurry, and you know, I think Nancy's right. I mean, usually making a decision in a hurry ends up in some sorrow. So that doesn't help us tonight, because you know, I think we've eliminated one of the three options there. But you know, if there's any ability from Duke to, you know, to relax its schedule so that we can do these types of things and have these kinds of informational exchanges with the neighborhoods, so that we can figure out a reasonable funding mechanism, that would be very helpful. And I know that they're in a hurry to get going on this project, and I don't want to miss the bus on a project because we're, you know, just caught having endless meetings. But at the same time, it's not going to happen. So I don't know if that requires more discussions with Duke, people who are, you know, willing to have those kind of meetings with us. And I don't know if those folks are in the room tonight. Might give us an idea about whether there's any kind of, you know, and we've had this discussion before. We had it last time too, and I understand you guys have projects and you have plans as well, but you know, this is a big decision for us. It takes some time.
And it is frustrating because, you know, one of the things that is on that list is Maitland Avenue. And of all of the projects that are on that list that I think actually would be deserving of city money for us to invest in would be the undergrounding of Maitland Avenue, because that is our central business corridor. We have talked extensively for decades about trying to improve Maitland Avenue to make that business downtown better for walkability, and of course, obviously, getting those power poles out of the way would make a huge amount of sense, but here we are once again. That would be something that would be really wonderful if we had the luxury of time to talk about, because we do have a significant interest and have expressed it continuously over the years to try and underground the city and to make it a priority. But just like everything else in this plan, our back is up against the wall to make a decision. And so I'm extremely frustrated about that because I would want to talk about funding mechanisms for us to pay for Maitland Avenue exclusively as something we would underground. But we also don't have the luxury of even having a number. So we don't even know what we'd be looking at because we don't, we don't have a number. So I'm frustrated that we've been put into this position to make a decision without enough information, without being given enough time. And, the only decision that really feels like the one we can make is for us to just wave the white flag and say, go ahead, do what you're going to do, because we don't have enough information and we haven't got enough time to be able to make any other choice. So.
Well, Duke's here now, and I hope that, they take this back with them and say, hey, listen, it didn't go too well this time. We need to give them a little more advance notice, and maybe we can work together, because cities aren't like private businesses where I can just go, yeah, that's great, go for it. So we have to go through a broader process. So I just thank you again for coming out. Like I said, nothing made you come here, so I appreciate it. But yeah, if you take it back and just to the higher ups, say, we're going to need who they got higher ups, right? You got higher ups. Everybody does, right? Except one. So, yeah, just let them know in the future we need more time.
But that's the issue, is that it would be ideal to do it incrementally, like we do our sewage projects, like we do all of our other infrastructure, which is what we've been trying to do with Domrick undergrounding. That's part of it, but we need, as Lindsay said, we need the number. But we need to know how much it costs before we can budget it. And if we're waiting on quotes for 5 years, this is the issue.
Yeah.
So the frustration, I think, is that it could seem that the city of Maitland has not moved on that Domrick project. And there may be parts of that that are true over time, but ultimately it's because we haven't had a number. We cannot fund an unknown number.
Right.
We were even told last year, hey, heads up, crystal ball, you guys are going to be able to underground Domrick next year. Cool. You know what? We would have been funding. We would have been putting money aside for it to be able to budget to do it because it's a priority and something we care about, and we promise the residents we do it. But asking us 5 minutes before we have to write the check, it's frustrating because how do we can't do it this way. Physically, government is set up in a way where everything moves slowly so that it goes through all these steps of checks and balances, which is great, but that's not how the corporate world works. And so we are ramming these two concepts together, and it's putting us in a disadvantage to make it look like we don't care, and that's certainly not the case. We can't do this in a way that makes sense for our residents without harming more people than it's going to benefit.
I also don't want to be the reason why a project that is going to definitely improve things, that to some degree does not go forward, does not happen, or, because we're having meetings.
So I think Mark's hearing us. I think I would suggest, at our next meeting, we'd really, bring it down to these two. We figure out what we can get from Duke, any funding, and that's going to be the decision probably between the two, and then we vote on them at the meeting of those two.
I would also say that if it is the case that we're not going to do any special assessments without the local authority to do it, then we can go ahead and ask for that ordinance to be drafted and considered. It doesn't mean we're going to necessarily use it, but it's something that sounds like a tool for the toolbox we're going to need. If not in December, then perhaps in January, who knows? But so, you all agree? It doesn't.
Yeah.
Bring back an ordinance that would allow us to move as fast as we need to move.
For December?
Yeah.
Is that what you're asking for first?
Well, collectively, you get one request for Christmas, so it has to be unanimous.
Or a special assessment, I'm sure that is not what we were looking for.
Live is fast, I'm sure you can get that.
I'm good.
All right.
Okay, and then I guess there's just one one thing that I didn't get clarity on, and that is, I'm more than happy to have discussions with our friends at Duke to see if there is any way to extend this, but to just inject a tad bit of realism to this, if they would extend this 6 months, that would, for us to do a public outreach program, we'd be doing a public outreach program larger than anything we've ever done in the city, just with the Domrick neighborhood, and then we'd have to duplicate that for at least the other 6 neighborhoods we saw, because everything will be treated differently, because the numbers are going to be different in terms of assessment and reliability and things like that, if we're going to be doing a study for each of those. So we would have to break that out in, because it wouldn't be one assessment to cover all of these neighborhoods, because they're going to be vastly different when it comes to the impacts of assessment. So that would be, even if they gave us 6 months, that would be extremely high. Like you said, Mayor, just with Greenwood Gardens, that was a 3-year process that took place before I got here.
And just to competing with that from our conversation, we also were planning on trying to do public outreach starting out the first of the year about the library. So something that we have strongly prioritized as a city as a very important issue, we would have to compete with undergrounding and the library as messaging that we would have to figure out how to run those concurrently.
Mark, you and I talked to some degree about finding a consultant that would be helpful in, surveys and such, and somebody we talked about thought that was, we just have to find the right size consultant to help us, kind of make a public assessment, for instance, go into Domrick or go into, Minnehaha and Shores and say, knock on as many doors as you can to get the result. And ask them a realistic question. That's just the first step. That's not the end.
And there are folks that do that. We have folks under continuing, I believe they're still under continuing service contract. Those are expiring soon. They could do that. They go out and get proposals, see what that would take. But here again, turning around a proposal and the time frame we're dealing with, and then funding that is a challenge also. Everything's a challenge in the rest time frame.
Right. Well, I think I know that for Domrick, for instance, and I keep coming back to Domrick, but it's familiar, and also I know that there are a couple of people in the room who could help with that. The Domrick Beach Civic Association is here, and if you're going to reach out to the neighborhood, that's a good place to start. The HOA that deals with them, and so we've got somebody who's interested and will help us with that. That's certainly from the city's perspective. We have to do our own end, and they don't want us to run their show. We don't want them to run our show. So, but it's a partnership that we would need to get out there and start figuring out what the answer to these things is. And that goes the same for any other neighborhood that reach out to the HOA first, find out what what their desires are. It's largely an informational campaign, so it's not just a question, it's an informational campaign. We've been here for a few hours learning about this, and this is all we're doing. So we know that it's going to be, the learning curve is kind of steep. But we got to start somewhere. The project's in front of us now, and we can't miss this opportunity to do. We don't want to be caught flat-footed and not take decisions because we just, for whatever reason. So let's do our best to keep going on that. And if it's too much, it's too heavy a lift, and it's not the kind of thing that needs to be funded, then let Duke do their thing and we'll move on. And if we want to get involved, then perhaps we'll have enough time to make a reasoned decisions and make an assessment accordingly.
Do we have any idea in terms of a repayment schedule, right? Because if we're talking about this in hypotheticals, we seem to be advancing down the road that a special assessment would make the most amount of sense, right? So, regardless, December 31st, we write the check for, let's say, what, 1.5 million, right? That's money that's gone until we figure out a way to get it back, right? And we're going to collect it back. So if we special assess the residents on even a conservative repayment schedule of, 5 years? Greenwood Gardens is 10 years.
For the 1800.
For $1,800. So, I mean, that's 10 years before we get that $1 million back. That's money that for next year, we don't have to spend on other stuff that we still want to do. And as much as we talk about, we're gonna get it, we'll special assess, we'll pay for, you know, a consultant to go and ask everybody, then we'll figure out how to get the thing passed, then we'll go and special assess everybody. We're still looking at a long-term repayment schedule of getting the city's money back in order to be able to recoup cost. That still means next year, going into what we think is probably, I mean, prices on homes is still up, but people are not selling as quickly as they were this year. So I think we probably are forecasting with, you know, the news of all of these companies laying people off, maybe we're coming into some sort of recessionary trend right now. Are we going to be bringing in as much money as a city next year as we brought in this year and last year? Is a fiscally responsible thing for us to do as a city to then write a check for $1 million plus to fund something, hoping that we'll get it back over a 10-year period, knowing that next year all of the things we had already wanted to do and were planning to do, we now can't do. I don't know. I'm worried that we're setting ourselves up. I mean, we have, you know, Kim's got our sewer projects we have to pay for. We've got our boardwalks that we want to fix and we want to do. We've talked about our parks that, you know, need new playground equipment and the things that we've talked about doing as a city to, you know, finally finish sidewalks. All of that work is going to be sidelined because we can't pay for it because we're now on a 10-year payment plan to get our money back for one project. I don't know. I'm having a really big difficulty figuring out how that even. And I know we can go through the mental gymnastics of asking all of these questions and finding out how do we now get to that end result of asking all the residents what they think. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we have to write a check at the end of this next month, and we're bound by that decision regardless of how we figure out how to pay for it, because starting in 6 weeks, we are now in a new fiscal year, and we don't have that money to pay for the thing we want to do next year, which is to build sidewalks and finish sewer projects and take care of all of the other things for the rest of the city. I don't know. I'm leaning more towards just letting Duke do what they're going to do, because I don't think that we can possibly come up with a good way of making this work on the time frame, or even justifying the cost to write that check. I'm really concerned about that.
Can I have a question? Can we ask you, what kind of payment plan would we have to do
Ma'am, the discussion's up here now. Thank you. Well, those are reasonable concerns, those are clearly, and you know, we would have to look at it. What we're asked to do is to re-budget for the out years, our CIP, our park plans, our everything else that's going on, and what the effect of that would be, we don't really know yet. So yeah, that would be the exercise we're going to do. We're going to write a check for $1.7 million and get back some, you know, tenth of that annually. What does that do for the projects we have going on? What does that do for our tax rate? What does that do for, so that's the exercise we need to go through before we make that decision. And you know, I think what I'm hearing is nobody's very excited about making that decision by December 31st, because I don't think we're going to have all the information for ability to do that. But you know, this is Duke's timeline, so you know, I'm not sure how, if it was etched in stone or if it was on paper or what. So we need to figure that out.
Yeah. I mean, Mark, I would say just, you know, see what we can do about getting these guys extended. I mean, because, like, to your point, if we get extended in 6 months, it gives us a whole different.
I heard something different from when he was talking. But what I was going to say is that, to me, theoretically, it doesn't hurt to ask questions. That's actually one of my favorite things to say. However, if you're looking for direction, and I know that you are, from me personally, in terms of asking for more time, as you said, 6 months, theoretically, 6 months, probably doesn't get us anywhere better, really, in terms of all these issues we're discussing. And my real fear, based on everything I'm hearing, is that we pass up the opportunity to get the free work done by pushing this off too much. And I really, 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 really do not want that to be our legacy up here, is that we talked it to death so that they went on with their free money elsewhere. That is a very real fear of mine about extending it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think we beat this thing up pretty well. You know, I would go with, let's see if there's any, it is to go forward with just allow Duke to proceed as they are, but to see if we can get any funding, and if we get any funding, then we'll have an answer hopefully by next month to say, all right, listen, go forward, but we want this and this done. You know, we can prioritize at the next meeting where we could spend that funding at. How does that sound?
I can't wait to see how the federal government's going to give us money by December 31st.
Lindsay, what do you think? I mean, it might be zero. The number might be zero and Duke just goes forward with what they're doing.
It can't hurt to ask questions.
Right, it's always no till you ask.
Right, we can certainly ask questions, but even if we get the answers, I don't know how that accelerates the timeline for any decisions we have to make, other than we have to cut a check on December 31st, and then we have to live with the consequences of how we do that.
And we all know how grants work, regardless of what they're, I mean, I've done my own research on these, and I believe that, I don't think that qualifies here, but nonetheless, even if we do, that money isn't here by December 31st.
Right.
From the federal government. That's you front the money and hope that you get it back. Right?
It's even that.
But again, I agree, it doesn't hurt.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt. So we're kind of in agreement, I think, Mark.
We are?
Let's just allow Duke to proceed with.
Write it down. Okay, we're good.
Let
Duke passed out 10 minutes ago. Did you hear all of this conversation?
Yeah. Let Duke proceed.
Obviously, we can look into federal funding.
Yeah.
We can do that. We should have some indication of whether there's federal funding and what that form that would be.
Right.
Within a month or not, but we can ask the question. As far as so I guess we're going on these one by one. So we look into federal funding. Do you still want the costs for Horatio, Sandsboro, and Maitland Avenue? Does that help inform your decision-making process on these overall projects? That just adds money to it.
Yeah, I don't think so.
No, not I.
Okay.
I would like to know the number for Maitland Avenue. And I would, because I do genuinely think that that is one thing that we have talked about as a city, as part of our downtown master plan for a very long time, is to try and do that. And, you know, that would be something that I think would be a long-term investment in the entire city, that I think would be a different and distinguishable.
Well, that's what I heard, that's what I'm asking, but
Yes.
That's not up to me, that's up to the four of you.
I mean, you can at least ask the question, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so everybody's good with that? So I'll go out on a little information gathering. I'll talk to them right now, talk to them tomorrow. They have open lines of communication between the city and Duke about their flexibility on their schedule, just to see what that can get us. Bring forward a ordinance on special assessments for December. Yes, everybody's saying make that happen. And get a proposal from one of our consultants to manage a public outreach information campaign to see if we get an extension, that we could do something within that time frame. Right now it's going to be a challenge getting a proposal from anybody as we're moving into the time of year we're moving into. So I can ask the question, see who has the ability on a short time frame, that has the manpower to be able to throw at this and put a proposal together. I can ask the question if that helps your decision-making process. I will absolutely do that. Okay, that's what I had on my list.
Okay. Do you want more on the list, or?
If there's more, I'd rather know it now than get a call from 3 of you tomorrow with 3 different ideas, so.
There's 8 days of Hanukkah.
Okay, well, I think that concludes the discussion tonight. I think it was an edifying exercise. So thank you, Duke, again for coming out. Thank you all for residents taking this long chunk of time out of your Monday evenings. We're down to reports. We're almost at the end of our meeting. Dr. Hamm was just reporting. Mr. City Attorney, any reports?
I have so much I could say, but I'll pass. I actually know a lot about this issue that we haven't said, but that's for another day.
All right. Wow, cliffhanger. No pun intended. Yeah. Okay, Mr. City Manager, any reports?
No, just,
Art, how was the arts?
that's what I was just gonna say, that I'd like to extend my personal appreciation to the Rotary Club with the challenges that were presented before us, with Nicole rolling through, and an art festival that night, while following that with my staff being tied up with other things, the collaboration that took place between, primarily Jay, I gotta give Jay most of the credit here, between Jay and the leadership, setting up the art festival through the Rotary Club to give them as many options as they possibly could have, because they had issues potentially with using Lake Lily Park, and they had to make decisions on moving it. I think in the end, it turned out to be a fantastic festival. It turned out great for everybody. We had the park open, a little more compact up on the street, so it was a very nice festival. But there was a lot of hand-wringing that went on, and a lot of analysis that went into making those decisions and giving them the options so they could have as much flexibility as possible. But I think it turned out very well. It's just an example of a community coming together to work for a common goal, and it worked out for the best. And so I am very appreciative of Jay and the leadership and the Rotary Club for working together to make that thing happen. So that's all I have.
Yeah, and from that, talking to a couple people on the Rotary at the festival, although they were forced into an unfortunate situation where they didn't have access to the whole park, the way we've been doing it for years and years, a couple of folks said that, they kind of like this setup. They like just, being just on the road and the parking lot and in the building, because, it's all one level. People are not jumping through the grass. And it just was seeming a little more. So something good might come at the end of the day.
I had a lot of feedback from people who came up to me and told me how much nicer it was having it on the road. And I thought it was actually really aesthetically, really charming looking to see the art exhibits going up and around Maitland Avenue and kind of curving around past the Civic Center. I thought it looked really nice. So hopefully they will consider that next year, that maybe that actually is a better option.
That's exactly what they're saying. It's like people enjoy walking on a surface they understand, which is a road, rather than kind of going off to the side along the grass. And so
it's cool how a last minute chaotic change actually forced something that may actually work out better. So.
Well, and since I happen to live with a Rotarian, I would say, a Maitland Rotarian, I would say that they were full of praise and thanks to Public Works and to the city. They said that they were up before the sun on Friday, Public Works, out there helping them to set up, in addition to making sure it was a priority to have alternative options. So thank you. It is a neat show of community.
Madam City Clerk, any reports?
Yes, 2 things. I need consensus from council to ratify the emergency proclamation for Nicole that you signed on November 9th. So,
consensus.
Perfect. And then just to remind everyone, we do not have a meeting the week after Thanksgiving. So your next meeting is December 12th.
Okay, anybody on council have anything? Say it all?
I just want to give props to Public Works. In my neighborhood, and I saw them in a lot of other neighborhoods, really being proactive before the storm. So great job, Kim, to you and your staff.
Okay, without objection, we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.